Tonight, picture a long low ridge in high desert country, an hour after sunset, with the last of the daylight draining out of the western sky like water leaving a shallow bowl. The ground here is pale sand and dark gravel, still giving back the warmth it soaked up all afternoon, and if you sat down on it now, you would feel that warmth come up through your palms, gentle and dry, while the air above you turned cold enough to see your breath. There is sage growing in low grey clumps, and it smells sharp and clean when you brush past it. There is no town within 40 miles, no headlight moving on any road, no sound at all except a small wind moving over stone, which is not really a sound so much as a softening of the silence. And overhead, slowly, as your eyes let go of the last of the daylight, the stars are coming out. Not the handful you can see from a city street, but the true sky. The crowded one, thousands upon thousands of them, and between them a faint band of milky light lying across the whole dome from one horizon to the other. An old man is sitting on the ridge with his back against a boulder and a blanket over his knees, doing nothing in particular, looking up the way people have looked up from this ridge for 10,000 years. He is not thinking anything clever about it. He is simply keeping the sky company for a while before he sleeps. Now, most nights on this channel we follow one long story from its beginning to its end, and we walk it slowly, hour after hour, until you have drifted off somewhere in the middle of it. Tonight is going to be a little different, and I think a little easier. Tonight we are simply going to gather 100 small quiet facts about the solar system. Our own neighbourhood, the sun and its family of worlds, and we are going to turn each one over in our hands, the way you might turn a smooth stone you picked up on a beach, look at it, feel the weight of it, and then set it down and pick up the next. There is no plot to lose. There is no thread you must hold on to. If you fall asleep at fact number 9, you have missed nothing, because nothing that comes after depends on it. That is rather the point. So settle now into whatever stillness you have made for yourself. Let the lamp go dim. Let the day you have had, whatever it held, whatever it asked of you, slide down off your shoulders one slow inch at a time, the way a heavy coat slips from the back of a chair. There is nothing left tonight that needs deciding. There is nothing left that needs carrying. If these slow journeys help you, and only if they truly do, you might let this one know with a quiet like, and follow along so the next can find you on some other sleepless night. And if you feel like it, leave your town and your local time down in the comments before you drift, because there is something companionable in knowing that all over the world. In 100 different hours, other people are lying in the dark, listening to the same soft voice. And now let us begin. And let us begin with the fact that this whole night is built around, because there is no reason at all to make you wait for it. Sleepy fact number 1. There is a small machine, about the size of a compact car, that left the surface of this planet in the year 1977, and tonight, as you lie there in the warm, it is still flying. It is called Voyager 1. It was launched in the late summer of that year from a coast of Florida, on a rocket, by people wearing wide ties and thick spectacles, in an age of rotary telephones and paper punch cards, and it has never once come back. And it has never once stopped. It has been travelling for almost 50 years without a single day off, without a single night of sleep, at a speed of roughly 38,000 miles an hour, which is fast enough to cross the whole United States in about 4 minutes. It is now more than 15 billion miles away from the ridge where the old man is sitting. That is a number so large that it stops meaning anything, so let us make it mean something. If you could drive a car up out of the atmosphere and along the path that little machine has taken, at 70 miles an hour, never stopping for fuel or food or sleep, you would need something in the region of 25,000 years to catch it, and by the time you arrived it would no longer be there, because it would have gone another 15 billion miles further on. It is the most distant object that human hands have ever made, and it is still, faintly, talking to us. Sleepy fact number 2. The signal it sends home is almost unimaginably faint. Its transmitter runs on about 22 watts. which is less power than the bulb in a refrigerator, and by the time that whisper has crossed 15 billion miles of nothing and reached the great dishes that listen for it in California and Spain and Australia, it arrives at a strength of less than 1/1000,000,000th of a watt. It is often said that the total energy collected from all the deep space signals ever received by all those dishes, added together across all those decades, is less than the energy of a single snowflake landing on the ground. And out of that whisper, patiently, engineers still pull numbers. Sleepy fact number 3. Because that signal travels at the speed of light, and no faster. A message sent to Voyager 1 tonight would take about 23 hours to arrive, and its answer would take another 23 hours to come home. Nearly 2 full days for a single question and its reply. The people who work with it have long since made peace with that. You send your instruction, you go home, you sleep, you come back, you have breakfast, you sleep again, and then, sometime on the second morning, the machine answers you from a place where the sun is only the brightest star in a black sky. It is the slowest conversation our species has ever held, and it has been going on, without ever quite ending, for half a century. Sleepy fact number 4. There is a sister machine out there too, and here is the small oddity that people love. Voyager 2 launched first. It went up on the 20th of August, 1977, 16 days before Voyager 1. And yet, it is called number 2, because it was sent along a slower, longer, more generous path that would let it visit more worlds, while its sibling took the quick road and overtook it out beyond Jupiter. They have not seen one another since. They are now flying in almost opposite directions, one up out of the plane of the planets and one down below it, 2 small pieces of 1970s engineering drifting apart forever, each entirely alone. Sleepy fact number 5. Neither of them runs on sunlight. Out where they are, sunlight is far too thin to be of any use, so instead they carry a small warm heart of plutonium, which does nothing but sit there and decay and give off heat, and that heat is turned into a trickle of electricity. It is a beautifully simple arrangement with no moving parts to wear out. But it fades. Every year the power available drops by about 4 watts, and every few years the engineers must choose another instrument, another heater, another small piece of the machine, and switch it off forever, the way you might go through a big old house at the end of a long evening, turning off the lights room by room. They have been doing this gently for decades, and they have become rather good at it, and they have kept the thing alive years longer than anyone in 1977 dared to hope. Sleepy fact number 6. The reason those 2 machines could see so much is that the outer planets lined up, and they line up like that only once in about 176 years. Someone worked this out in the mid-1960s, and realized that a probe launched in the late 70s could swing past Jupiter, and use Jupiter's gravity to fling it onto Saturn, and use Saturn's to fling it onto Uranus, and then on again to Neptune, riding from world to world like a stone skipping across a pond, arriving in the outer dark with a fraction of the fuel it would otherwise have needed. Had they been born 10 years earlier or 10 years later, it could not have been done. The previous time that alignment came around, the President of the United States was Thomas Jefferson. Sleepy fact number 7. Bolted to the side of each of those 2 machines, there is a gold-plated copper record, 12 inches across, with a stylus and a diagram showing how to play it. On it are 115 images, the sound of surf, of wind, of thunder, of birds and whales, greetings spoken in 55 languages, and about 90 minutes of music from all over the world, from Bach to Peruvian panpipes to a blues song recorded in 1927. Nobody sensible believes anyone will ever find it. That was never really the point. The point was the making of it, the arguing in committee rooms about what to include, the decision by a group of human beings in a difficult decade to gather up the best of themselves, seal it in gold, and throw it out into the dark on the smallest chance imaginable. Sleepy fact number 8. In 1990, when Voyager 1 was already about 4 billion miles out and pointing away from home, its cameras were turned around one last time to look back. In the photograph that came home, our entire world is less than a single pixel across, a tiny pale speck sitting by chance in a scattered beam of sunlight. Everyone you have ever loved is in that speck. Every war ever fought, every harvest ever gathered, every lullaby ever sung, all of it in a dot you could hide behind a grain of rice held at arm's length. The cameras were switched off shortly afterwards to save power, and they have never been switched on again. That photograph was the last thing they ever did. And so that is where we begin tonight, with a small cold machine, still flying, still whispering, 49 years out from a Florida morning. Everything else we talk about tonight, every world and moon and ring and storm, is a place that machine or one of its cousins has passed by, or looked at, or listened to. We are going to walk out through the solar system slowly, from the sun to the edge, gathering our 100 quiet facts as we go, and at the very end of the night, we will come back to that little traveller and find out exactly where it is while you are sleeping. Take a breath now. Let it out slowly. We have all the time in the world. Sleepy fact number 9. Let us start where everything here started, with the sun, and with the fact that the sun is not really one thing among many in this solar system. The sun is the solar system. If you could gather up every single object that orbits it, every planet, every moon, every asteroid, every comet, every grain of dust in every ring, and put the whole lot on one side of a set of scales, and put the sun on the other, the sun would hold something like 999 parts out of every 1,000. Nearly 99.9% of all the matter in this neighbourhood is inside the sun. Everything else, all the worlds we are going to visit tonight, every mountain and ocean and ring and storm, all of it together is a rounding error. Jupiter, that enormous striped giant, is most of what is left over, and everything after Jupiter is the leftovers of the leftovers. It helps to think of the solar system not as a collection of planets with a star in the middle, but as one great glowing ball of hydrogen with a very thin scattering of crumbs going round it. Crumbs so small and so far apart that if you drew the whole thing to scale on a page the size of a football pitch, the planets would be invisible specks of dust, and you would need a magnifying glass to find the Earth at all. And yet the crumbs are where all the interesting things happen. That is a rather lovely thought to lie down with. All the poetry of this system, all the weather and the water and the singing, is happening in the sweepings. Sleepy fact number 10. Sunlight takes 8 minutes and about 20 seconds to reach us. This means that you have never once seen the sun. You have only ever seen the sun as it was 8 minutes ago, when you stand at a window in the morning and the warmth lands on your face. That warmth left home while you were still asleep, crossed 93 million miles of absolute nothing at the fastest speed anything is allowed to travel, and arrived in time to find you standing there. If the sun were somehow to be switched off, the sky would stay perfectly ordinary for those 8 minutes and 20 seconds. The birds would carry on. The washing would carry on drying, and then the light would simply run out, the way the last of a spool of thread runs out, and the sky would fill with stars in the middle of the afternoon. This is true of everything you ever look at, of course, but the delays are usually too short to notice. The face of a person across a room reaches you a few billionths of a second late. The moon is a second and a quarter behind. Everything you have ever seen, without exception, is a report from the past. Sleepy fact number 11. Here is the part of the sun's story that I find most restful of all. The light that lands on your face this morning was not made this morning. It was made in the core of the sun, and the journey it took to get out of the sun took very much longer than the journey it took to cross space. Down in the core the energy is born, and then it must fight its way outward through material so densely packed that it can travel only a tiny distance before it collides with something and is absorbed, and spat out again in a random direction. Out, sideways, back inward, out again, a stagger rather than a walk, billions upon billions of times over. The estimates vary a great deal because the sun is not a simple place, but the numbers people give for that journey run from something like 10,000 years to 170,000 years. Then, at the surface, it finally breaks free, and the last leg of the whole enormous journey, the 93 million miles across empty space to your kitchen window, takes 8 minutes. The energy warming your hands may have set out before anyone had thought of farming. Sleepy fact number 12. The temperature at the centre of the sun is around 15 million degrees, and yet the surface, the part we actually see, is comparatively mild, about 5,500 degrees. That already sounds back to front, but the truly strange part is what happens above the surface. The corona, the sun's faint outer atmosphere that you can see as a pearly halo during a total eclipse, is not cooler than the surface as you would expect the further out you go. It is hotter. Very much hotter. 1 or 2 million degrees. It is as though you walked away from a bonfire and found the air getting warmer with every step you took backwards. Solar physicists have been arguing about why for the better part of 80 years, and the leading answers involve tangled magnetic fields snapping and rejoining, and countless tiny explosions called nanoflares, and waves running up through the sun's magnetic ropes like the shudder that runs up a plucked string. Spacecraft have now flown right into that corona to find out. It remains, quietly, one of the great unfinished questions sitting on our doorstep. Sleepy fact number 13. Every second, the sun turns about 600 million tons of hydrogen into helium, and in doing so it loses about 4 million tons of itself entirely. Not burnt, not used up as fuel in the way a log is used up. Converted, directly, into light and heat, in accordance with the most famous equation anyone has ever written. 4 million tons a second, gone from the scales and out into the universe as sunshine, which is roughly the mass of a large ocean liner vanishing every fraction of a second and has been happening continuously for 4,500 million years. And still the sun barely notices because the sun is so overwhelmingly large that all of that loss over its entire life so far adds up to less than 1/100th of what it started with. There is a strange comfort in that. The thing that keeps you warm is spending itself extravagantly, without accounting, and it has enough to go on doing so for another 5,000 million years. Sleepy fact number 14. You could line up 109 Earths across the face of the sun and only just reach the other side, and if you wanted to fill the sun up with Earths, you would need something like 1,300,000 of them. Try to hold that scale for a moment as you lie there. Take the whole of the Earth, every mountain range, every ocean trench, every city, all of it rolled into one ball, and understand that you would need to make that ball more than 1,000,000 times over just to fill the space taken up by the thing that is currently below the horizon. And the sun, in the wider scheme, is unremarkable. It is a middle-aged, medium-sized, ordinary yellow dwarf star, and there are stars out there beside which the sun would be a marble beside a cathedral. It is only our particular star, which is a different kind of importance altogether. Sleepy fact number 15. The sun is white, not yellow, not orange, not the colour any child has ever coloured it in. If you were to float above the atmosphere and look at it through a suitable filter, you would see a clean, brilliant white, because it puts out light fairly evenly across all the colours we can see, and all the colours together make white. The yellow is something our own air does to it. Our atmosphere scatters the short blue wavelengths in all directions, which is why the daytime sky is blue rather than black, and by removing that blue from the direct beam it leaves the sun looking warmer and more golden than it truly is. At sunset, when the light comes to you through a far greater thickness of air, even more blue and green are stripped away, and you are left with red and orange, which is why the end of the day is the colour it is. The sky is blue and the sunset is red for the same reason, and both of them are a kind of gentle theft. Sleepy fact number 16. The sun has a heartbeat, and it takes about 11 years. Over that period, the number of dark spots on its face climbs from almost none to 100 or more, and then falls away again. And at the peak of each cycle, the whole magnetic field of the sun turns over and swaps its poles, north becoming south, south becoming north, like a great slow breath being taken and let out. Those spots are cooler regions, where the magnetic field has bunched up and choked off the flow of heat from below, and they are only dark by comparison. Lift a single sunspot out and set it in the night sky on its own, and it would shine more brightly than the full moon. When the cycle is loud, the sun throws out flares and vast clouds of charged particles, and when those clouds arrive here, they set the polar sky alight with curtains of green and red. And sometimes the cycle goes quiet for decades at a stretch, as it did in the late 1600s, when hardly any spots were seen at all for 70 years, and the rivers of Europe froze in winters people wrote songs about. Sleepy fact. Number 17. The sun does not stop at its own surface. It is constantly leaking, blowing a thin, hot wind of charged particles out in every direction at hundreds of miles a second, and that wind carries on out past every planet, past the asteroids, past Jupiter and Saturn, past Neptune and the icy rubble beyond, out and out until it has inflated an enormous bubble in the gas that drifts between the stars. That bubble is called the heliosphere, and it is, in a real sense, the true edge of the solar system. Everything inside it is in the sun's weather. Everything outside it belongs to the galaxy at large. It is not a tidy sphere, but more of a long teardrop with a rounded nose in the direction we are travelling, and a soft tail streaming out behind, and it is enormous. The Earth sits about 1 unit of distance from the sun. The edge of that bubble sits at something like 120. Sleepy fact number 18. Nothing about this arrangement is permanent, though the timescales are so vast that permanence is a fair enough word for anything you care about. The sun is roughly 30% brighter now than it was when the Earth was new, and it will keep on slowly brightening. In something like 1,000 million years, that extra warmth will have made this planet uninhabitable, which is a considerably nearer deadline than the one people usually quote. In about 5,000 million years, the hydrogen in the core will run out, and the sun will swell into a red giant, swallowing Mercury and Venus certainly, and possibly reaching the orbit of the Earth. Then it will shrug off its outer layers as a beautiful glowing shell of gas, and settle down as a white dwarf, an ember the size of a small planet, cooling quietly in the dark for longer than the universe has so far existed. And all the while it is carrying us in a great circle around the centre of the galaxy at about 500,000 miles an hour, a circuit it completes once every 230 million years. The last time the sun was where it is now, the first dinosaurs were only just appearing. Sleepy fact number 19. Now let us take a step outward, to the first of the crumbs, a small grey battered world called Mercury. It is the closest planet to the sun, and the smallest of them all, so small that 2 of the moons in this solar system are bigger than it is. Ganymede, out at Jupiter, is bigger than Mercury. Titan, out at Saturn, is bigger than Mercury, and on that little world the days and the years have got themselves into the strangest tangle. Mercury turns on its axis exactly 3 times for every 2 circuits it makes around the sun, locked into that rhythm by the sun's pull, and the arithmetic of that produces something quite lovely. A single day on Mercury, measured properly, from one sunrise to the next sunrise, lasts 176 Earth days. A year on Mercury, one full circuit of the sun, lasts 88 Earth days, which means that on Mercury the day is exactly 2 years long. If you were standing on that grey dust, you would watch the sun crawl across the sky so slowly that you could walk faster than the shadows moved, and in the time it took the sun to travel from one horizon to the other, you would have had 2 birthdays. And because Mercury's orbit is stretched into an oval rather than a circle, there are places on that surface where the sun rises, climbs a little way, stops, goes backwards down the sky for a while, stops again, and then resumes its climb, before finally setting many weeks later. A sunrise that changes its mind. Sleepy fact number 20. Mercury has the widest swing of temperature of anywhere in the solar system. Standing in the sunshine at noon, with no atmosphere at all to soften anything, the ground reaches about 430 degrees, hot enough to melt lead and tin and leave them running in bright puddles. Then the long night comes, and with no air to hold any warmth, the heat simply escapes straight out into space, and by the deep of that night, the same ground has fallen to about 180 degrees below zero. 600 degrees of difference on the same patch of rock over the course of one very slow day. And here is the part that nobody expected. Mercury's axis is almost perfectly upright, which means that at its north and south poles there are crater floors so deep and so precisely angled that sunlight has never once fallen on them, not in billions of years. Radar from Earth found something bright and reflective hiding down in those permanently shadowed pits, and spacecraft later confirmed it. There is water ice at the poles of the closest planet to the Sun, billions of tons of it sitting in the dark a few miles from ground, hot enough to melt metal. Sleepy fact number 21. Mercury is mostly metal. Cut it open, and you would find an iron core so large that it takes up around 85% of the planet's radius, leaving only a thin shell of rock over the top of it, like the skin of an apple over an enormous iron pip. No other planet is built like that. Something went badly wrong there, long ago, and nobody is completely certain what. The most popular idea is that Mercury began as a much larger world with a proper thick rocky mantle, and was then struck an appalling glancing blow by something very big in the chaos of the early solar system, a collision that stripped away most of its outer rock and flung it into space, leaving the naked core behind to cool. Another suggestion is that the Sun, in its fierce and unruly youth, simply boiled and blew the lighter rock away. Either way, what circles closest to the Sun today is essentially the heart of a planet that lost the rest of itself. And astonishingly, that iron heart is still partly liquid, and still generating a real magnetic field, which is not something so small a world had any business keeping for so long. Sleepy fact number 22. Mercury is shrinking. As the great iron core has slowly cooled over billions of years, it has contracted, and the rocky crust laid over the top has been forced to shrink with it, the way the skin of a drying apple must wrinkle to fit what is left underneath, and a planet's crust cannot wrinkle gently. It buckles. So the whole surface of Mercury is crossed by enormous cliffs, hundreds of miles long and sometimes 2 miles high, running across craters and plains alike. Places where one great slab of the planet's skin has been shoved up over another. They are called lobate scarps, and by measuring them we can work out roughly how much has been lost. Mercury's radius has come down by something in the region of 4 to 7 miles since the crust hardened, and the wrinkling has not finished. Some of those cliffs are young enough that Mercury may still be having small quakes today, a little world quietly settling and creaking as it cools, the way an old house does at night. Sleepy fact number 23. Here is a fact that reliably makes people argue at dinner tables, and it is nonetheless true. On average, over long stretches of time, the planet closest to Earth is Mercury, not Venus. Venus comes nearer than any other planet at its closest approach, and that is the number everyone remembers. But Venus is only close for a short while, and then swings round to the far side of the Sun, and is very far away indeed for a long while. Mercury, tied on its short leash close in, can never get very far from us, because it can never get very far from the Sun. Average out the distance across all the years, and Mercury wins. And the same reasoning holds for every other planet too. Mercury is, on average, the nearest planet to Venus, and to Mars, and to Jupiter, and to Saturn, and even to distant Neptune. The little burnt world that nobody thinks about turns out to be everybody's nearest neighbour, simply because it never wanders far from the fire. Sleepy fact number 24. Now outward again, to the second planet, and to the strangest thing in the whole inner solar system. Venus is almost exactly the same size as the Earth. 95% of our diameter, 82% of our mass, made of much the same rock, formed at much the same time, from much the same material, in the same neighbourhood. By every reasonable expectation it should be our twin. And the surface of Venus is about 465 degrees, all over, everywhere, hot enough to make lead run like water, and hot enough that the ground glows faintly in the dark. It is hotter than Mercury, even though it is nearly twice as far from the Sun, and it is not hotter in the daytime only. It is that hot at midnight. It is that hot at the poles. The atmosphere is so thick and so heavy with carbon dioxide that the heat which arrives can never leave, and the whole planet has settled into a single unvarying furnace temperature from which nothing escapes. There is no cool place on Venus. There is nowhere to shelter. That is what a runaway greenhouse does to a world, given long enough. Sleepy fact number 25. The air on Venus is not really air. If you stood on that surface, the pressure bearing down on you would be about 92 times what you feel now, which is the pressure you would meet if you sank 3,000 feet down into one of our own oceans. It would not feel like wind. It would feel like being underwater in something hot and thick and slow. Above you, the sky would be a dim, uniform, sulphurous orange, permanently overcast, with no sun visible at all, only a smothered brightness overhead. And 40 miles above your head there would be an unbroken deck of cloud, made not of water but of droplets of sulphuric acid, wrapped right around the planet, tearing along at 200 miles an hour, circling the entire world in 4 days while the planet beneath them barely moves. From those clouds it rains acid continuously, and not one drop of that rain ever reaches the ground, because the air below is so hot that every drop boils away long before it lands and rises back up to fall again. Rain that has been falling forever and has never once touched the surface. Sleepy fact number 26. Venus spins backwards, and it spins almost impossibly slowly. Every other planet in the family turns in the same direction it travels, which is what you would expect from a system that condensed out of one spinning disk. Venus turns the other way. So on Venus, the sun rises in the west and sets in the east, and it takes 243 Earth days to complete one turn, while it goes all the way around the sun in 225. Which means that on Venus, a day is longer than a year. It is quite possibly the most peaceful sentence in astronomy. As for how it ended up that way, the honest answer is that we are not sure. It may have been knocked over entirely by a colossal impact early on, so that it is now effectively upside down. Or the immense tides raised in that heavy atmosphere by the sun may have acted like a brake over billions of years, slowing the spin, stopping it, and finally turning it the other way. A whole planet turned around by its own weather. Sleepy fact number 27. The first photographs ever taken from the surface of another world did not come from Mars or the Moon. They came from Venus in the 1970s, sent by a series of extraordinarily tough Soviet landers. Getting anything to survive down there was a task close to impossible, and the early attempts were crushed on the way down or died within minutes. The engineers responded by building what were essentially deep-sea submersibles for the sky, with titanium hulls and pre-chilled interiors packed with ice, dropped through that furnace to work as fast as they could before the heat found them. One of them lasted 23 minutes, one lasted 53. The longest survived just over 2 hours, which nobody had thought possible, and in that time they sent home grainy panoramas of a flat orange plain scattered with broken slabs of rock, stretching away to a close horizon under a dim smothered sky. Then, one by one, each of them fell silent. They are all still standing there now, corroded and quiet, the only monuments we have on a world that will not let us stay. Sleepy fact number 28. And yet, for all of that, Venus is the loveliest thing in our sky after the sun and the moon. Those unbroken acid clouds make it the most reflective planet we have, throwing back about 3/4 of the sunlight that falls on it, and so it hangs over the horizon at dusk and before dawn as a steady white lamp bright enough to cast a shadow on fresh snow. The ancients in several parts of the world took the evening star and the morning star to be 2 different objects with 2 different names, and it took a long while to accept that the two were one. And there is one last gentle strangeness about it. If you rise up above that furnace surface into the atmosphere, about 30 miles up, you come to a layer where the pressure is roughly the same as the air in your bedroom tonight, and the temperature is somewhere between a warm afternoon and a hot one. Of all the places in the solar system beyond the Earth, that thin band of sky, floating above the most hostile ground we know, is the most comfortable spot there is. Let us pause there for a moment, before we go on, and let the mind settle. Out on the ridge the old man has not moved. The cold has come down properly now, the way it does in desert country once the ground has finished giving back its heat, and he has pulled the blanket a little higher without particularly noticing that he did it. Above him, low in the west, there is a single steady white lamp of a star that is not a star at all, and now you know what it is, and what it is made of, and what the rain is doing there tonight. That is all the fact was ever for. Not to be remembered. Just to make the light overhead a little more companionable while you fall asleep beneath it. Breathe in slowly. Hold it a moment. Let it go. And now we come to the third world out from the fire, which is the one you are lying on. Sleepy fact number 29. There is almost no water on Earth. I know how that sounds. 2/3 of the surface is ocean. The ocean is on average about 2 1/3 miles deep, and there is so much of it that we named the planet wrongly and should probably have called it something to do with the sea. And yet, weighed against the whole of the planet, all of that water, every ocean and ice cap and lake and river and cloud and puddle, comes to about 0.02% of the Earth's mass. If you gathered every drop of it into a single ball and set that ball down beside the Earth, it would be a little sphere less than 700 miles across, a marble beside a football. Everything else, all the enormous rest of it, is rock and iron. The sea that has drowned ships and fed nations and taken up most of the surface of the world is, in the honest arithmetic of the thing, a film of damp on a stone. And the same is true of the air. If you could smooth the Earth down to the scale of a billiard ball, it would be smoother than the billiard ball. Mountains and trenches and the whole of the atmosphere and the whole of the ocean together would be a haze of moisture you could wipe off with a cloth. Every single thing that has ever lived has lived in that haze. Sleepy fact number 30. The days are getting longer, not in the way that summer days are longer, but genuinely, permanently for everyone. The moon raises tides in our oceans, and those tides drag against the spinning of the Earth like a hand trailed in water, and that drag is slowing us down. It is slowing us by roughly 1.5 thousandths of a second per century, which is far too small to notice in a lifetime, and rather large indeed over the age of a planet. Wind it back. When the great dinosaurs were walking about, the day was about 23 hours long, and a year held closer to 370 days. Wind it back further to 1,000 million years ago, and the day may have been only 18 or 19 hours, with well over 400 sunrises crammed into every circuit of the sun. And we know this not merely from calculation, but from actual fossils, because certain corals lay down a fine growth line every single day and a thicker band every year, so that a piece of coral from the ancient sea is a clock you can hold in your hand and count. The rock remembers how fast the world was turning when it was young. Sleepy fact number 31. Deep inside the Earth, an ocean of liquid iron is churning, and that churning generates the magnetic field that swings the needle of every compass on the planet. It is not a decoration, it is a shield. Out there the solar wind is blowing constantly, and where a world has no magnetic field to deflect it, that wind gets in among the upper air and strips it away, molecule by molecule, over hundreds of millions of years. That is a large part of why Mars, which almost certainly had rivers and lakes and a thick sky, is now dry and thin and cold. Our field turns that wind aside, and what leaks through funnels down at the poles and lights the auroras. And the field is not steady. It wanders, it weakens, it strengthens, and every so often it turns completely over, so that north becomes south. It has done this hundreds of times, at irregular intervals, and we can read the record of it in bands of ancient lava and in the stripes of magnetized rock laid down on either side of the mid-ocean ridges, frozen in place like a tape recording of the planet's own mind changing. The last full reversal was about 780,000 years ago. Nobody can tell you when the next one is due. Sleepy fact number 32. Space is not far away. It is only far away sideways. Straight up, the edge of the atmosphere by the usual convention is about 62 miles overhead, which is a distance most people would drive on a Saturday morning without thinking about it. If you could turn your car onto a vertical road and keep to the speed limit, you would be in space in about an hour, and you would have used less fuel than a trip to see relatives. And the air thins out very much faster than that suggests. Half of the entire atmosphere by weight lies below 3.5 miles. 99% of it lies below 20 miles. Everything you have ever breathed, every cloud you have ever watched cross a window, every bird and aeroplane and storm and rainbow, all of it happens in a skin of gas that, drawn to scale on a globe the size of a beach ball, would be thinner than a coat of varnish. Astronauts almost all say the same thing when they come home and are asked what surprised them. It was not how big the Earth looked, it was how thin the blue line was around the edge of it. Sleepy fact number 33. The Earth is not a sphere, and it is not where you think it is. It is a slightly squashed ball, wider around the middle than it is from pole to pole, because it is spinning and the spin flings the middle outward. The bulge is about 13 miles, which is small compared with the whole, but it has one delightful consequence. The summit of Everest is the highest point above sea level, but it is not the point on the surface furthest from the centre of the Earth. That honour goes to a volcano in Ecuador called Chimborazo, which is only about 20,000 feet high, but sits almost exactly on the equator, riding out on the bulge, so that its peak stands over a mile further from the centre of the world than the top of Everest does. Climb Chimborazo and you are as far out into space as any standing person has ever been. And the second half of that fact is this. The Earth's orbit is a slight oval, and we are nearest to the Sun in the first week of January and furthest away in early July, which means that the northern hemisphere has its winter, while the whole planet is at its closest to the fire. The seasons have nothing to do with distance. They are made entirely by the tilt. Sleepy fact number 34. The moon is leaving. Every year it moves about 1.5 inches further away from us, and we do not have to take that on trust, because the astronauts who walked there left behind panels of mirrors, carefully angled, sitting quietly on the dust. Ever since, observatories on Earth have been firing pulses of laser light at those mirrors and timing how long the light takes to come back. And the answer, measured now for more than half a century, is that the round trip is getting slightly longer every year. 1.5 inches a year sounds like nothing at all. Over the lifetime of the Earth and Moon, it is everything. Long ago, the Moon hung enormously closer and enormously larger in the sky, and the tides it raised were monstrous, sweeping miles inland and back out twice a day, churning the shallow seas of a young world, and it is still going. In the far future, the Moon will be a smaller, more distant, more ordinary thing in the sky, and nobody will think it remarkable at all. Sleepy fact number 35. Which brings us to what I think is the single most improbable coincidence in the sky. The Sun is about 400 times wider than the Moon. The Sun is also about 400 times further away than the Moon. And so the two of them, one a vast burning star and the other a small dead rock, appear from this particular planet at this particular moment in its history to be almost exactly the same size. That is why we get total eclipses of the kind we get, where the Moon slides over the Sun and covers the bright disk so precisely that the corona flares out around it like a silver flower, and the birds go quiet, and the temperature drops, and people who have seen it never really stop talking about it. There is no law of physics that requires this. It is simply where we happen to be standing in time. Because the moon is drifting away, its apparent size is slowly shrinking, and in something like 600 million years, the last total eclipse will happen, and from then on the moon will never quite cover the sun again. We are alive during the window. Sleepy fact number 36. The moon keeps one face turned to us at all times, because the Earth's pull long ago slowed its spin until it turned exactly once for every circuit it made, and it has been holding that pose ever since. Every human being who lived before 1959, every astronomer and shepherd and sailor and emperor in all of history, saw only ever the same half of it. Then a small Soviet spacecraft swung around behind and sent back the first blurred photographs of the other side, and it turned out to be a genuinely different place. The side we know is blotched with the great dark plains of ancient lava that people have made faces and rabbits and old men out of for as long as there have been people. The far side has almost none of that. It is pale, rugged, crowded with craters piled on craters, and its crust is markedly thicker. Nobody is entirely certain why the two halves are so unalike, and do please note that it is not the dark side. It gets exactly as much sunlight as ours does, just on a different schedule. It is only ever dark to us. Sleepy fact number 37. The moon rings. When the Apollo crews left the moon, they deliberately crashed the discarded parts of their spacecraft into the surface and let the seismometers they had set out listen to what happened, and what happened astonished everyone. The moon shook and went on shaking for the better part of an hour, the vibrations rolling round and round without dying away as they would on Earth. Dry, cold, cracked, with no water in the rock to damp the motion, the whole world rang like a struck bell. And it is a very still place otherwise. There is no wind, no rain, no weather of any kind, so the boot prints pressed into the grey dust more than 50 years ago are still there, sharp-edged, exactly as they were left, and they will remain legible for millions of years unless something strikes them. The dust itself is strange. It has never been rounded off by water, so every grain is a tiny jagged splinter of glass and rock that clings to everything and cuts into seals and fabric. And when the astronauts came back inside and took off their helmets, they all noticed the same thing. The dust on their suits smelt of spent gunpowder. Sleepy fact number 38. The best explanation we have for the existence of the moon is a catastrophe. In the first 50 million years or so of the solar system, when there were still many more planets than there are now, and their orbits crossed one another, a body about the size of Mars is thought to have struck the young Earth an enormous glancing blow. Both were largely melted by it. A great spray of vaporized rock was flung out into orbit, and out of that ring of debris. In perhaps only a century or two, the moon gathered itself together. That is why the moon is made of material so like the Earth's outer layers, and why it has almost no iron core to speak of, and why the Earth spins as fast as it does. And there is a debt in it that we are still paying off with interest. Without a moon that large, the tilt of the Earth's axis would wander over long timescales, dragging the climate about with it. The moon holds our tilt steady at a comfortable 23.5 degrees and gives us seasons that repeat reliably, century after century, so that things can grow, and be planted, and be harvested, and be counted on. The worst day in this planet's history is the reason for every quiet spring since. The blanket has slipped a little. The old man on the ridge tugs it back without opening his eyes very far, and settles again against the warm stone, and somewhere off in the dark a small night creature moves through the sage, and stops and moves again. There is no hurry at all out here. The sky has turned all the way over to its deep midnight blue, and the band of milky light has climbed higher, and low in the east something the colour of an old copper coin has come up over the rim of the hills. It does not twinkle the way the stars do. It sits there, steady and unblinking, holding its light quite still, and it has been doing that on this ridge, and over every ridge and roof and window in the world, for as long as anyone has been keeping count. We have been calling it a god of war for 4,000 years, mostly because of that colour. Tonight let us go and stand on it. Sleepy fact number 39. There is a mountain on Mars called Olympus Mons that is so large it is difficult to think of it as a mountain at all. It stands about 14 miles high, which is 2.5 times the height of Everest measured from sea level, and its base is roughly the size of the state of Arizona, or if you prefer, roughly the size of France. But the number that matters is not the height, it is the slope. Because it grew from runny lava spilling out over and over for hundreds of millions of years on a world with weak gravity and no drifting continents to carry the volcano off the hotspot, it spread outward far more than it built upward, and its sides rise at an average angle of only about 5 degrees. 5 degrees is the gentle ramp up to a footbridge. So if you were set down on the flank of the largest volcano in the solar system, you would not experience a mountain. You would experience a very slight, very long, entirely unremarkable upward slope, going on beyond the horizon in both directions, and you could walk up it in ordinary boots for weeks without ever once needing to use your hands. You would only know you had climbed something enormous when you looked back and found the ground had fallen away into haze. And at the top there is a set of collapsed craters nested inside one another, the largest about the width of a small county, deep enough to swallow a mountain range and lose it. Sleepy fact number 40. Not far from that volcano, cut across the face of the planet, there is a canyon called Valles Marineris that is about 2,500 miles long. Set it down on the Earth, and one end would sit on the coast of California, and the other would be out on the eastern seaboard. It is up to 400 miles across, and in places more than 4 miles deep, which is around 4 times the depth of the Grand Canyon, and something like 10 times its length. And it was not cut by a river. The best understanding is that it began as an enormous crack in the crust, a stretching and tearing of the planet's skin, as the great bulge of volcanoes swelled up beside it, and that landslides and possibly flowing water widened it over ages afterward. Here is the part that is hard to hold in the mind. It is so wide that if you stood on one rim you would not see the other. The far wall would be below your horizon. You would simply be standing at the edge of the world, with a floor 4 miles down and a haze of pink dust filling the distance, and no evidence at all that the canyon ever ended. From orbit, it looks like a scar. From the ground, it would look like a country. Sleepy fact number 41. The gravity on Mars is about 38% of ours, which is one of those numbers that sounds abstract until you translate it into your own body lying there in bed. It means that if you weigh 180 pounds here, you would weigh 68 pounds there. It means that the shopping you struggle in with from the car would feel like a loaf of bread. It means that a person in reasonable health, given a little practice, could jump onto the roof of a single-story house, and that a fall which would break bones here would be something you simply picked yourself up from. Everything would be slower and floatier. A dropped spoon would take noticeably longer to reach the floor, and would seem to think about it on the way down. And the day, delightfully, is almost the same as ours. Mars turns once every 24 hours and 37 minutes, so a person moving there would find the rhythm of morning and evening almost immediately familiar, only very slightly stretched, gaining a little over half an hour every day, like a clock that runs kindly slow. The people who work the rovers on Mars time speak of living on sols instead of days, and of their working lives sliding gently around the face of the Earth's clock until they are having breakfast at midnight. Sleepy fact number 42. Mars is red for the most ordinary reason imaginable. It is rusty. The rock there is rich in iron, and over a very long time that iron has combined with oxygen, and the fine dust that results is iron oxide, which is to say rust. The same stuff that blooms orange on a gate hinge, left out in the rain. That dust has been picked up by the winds and spread over the entire planet, so that even the ice at the poles has a faint blush to it. And the dust does something wonderful to the light. During the day the Martian sky is not blue, but a pale butterscotch or salmon colour, because the suspended dust scatters the warmer colours around the sky. And then, at sunset, the thing turns completely around. The dust scatters the red light away from your line of sight and lets the blue come through, so the sun goes down small and white in a pool of soft, cool blue that spreads out across the horizon and fades slowly to grey. Our sunsets are red in a blue sky. Theirs are blue in a red sky. The rovers have sent home photographs of it, and they are among the quietest images anyone has ever taken. Sleepy fact number 43. Mars has 2 little moons, and they are not moons in the way ours is a moon. They are lumpy, dark potato-shaped rocks, almost certainly captured asteroids or the rubble of an old collision. One about 14 miles across, and one about 8. The larger of them, Phobos, orbits so close to the surface, only about 3,500 miles up, that it goes around the planet 3 times in a single Martian day. Which means that from the ground it rises in the west, hurries across the sky in about 4 hours, and sets in the east, and then does it again, and again, all night, while the other little moon goes slowly the ordinary way. 2 moons going opposite directions at different speeds over a rust-coloured desert. And Phobos is falling. It creeps about 6 feet closer to Mars every century, and in something on the order of 50 million years it will come near enough that the tides will pull it apart, and Mars will very briefly, by the standards of these things, have a ring made of the pieces of its own moon. Sleepy fact number 44. There was water there, and it was not a trickle. From orbit we can see dried river channels branching like the veins in a leaf, and deltas fanned out where those rivers ran into standing water, and the flat floors of lakes, and rounded pebbles of the sort that only get rounded by tumbling along a stream for miles. A rover has driven through the remains of a river delta and found clays that only form in still water. For hundreds of millions of years early on, that world had rain and rivers and lakes, and possibly a shallow sea across its northern lowlands under a thicker, warmer sky. And the water has not all gone. Much of it is locked up in the polar caps, which are layered ice thousands of feet thick, and much more of it is buried as ice under the dust across the middle latitudes, in glaciers hidden beneath rubble, in sheets that spacecraft radar can see through the ground. If you melted only what we are confident about at the poles and spread it evenly over the whole planet, it would cover the entire globe in an ocean many feet deep. It is all still there. It is simply frozen and waiting, and has been waiting for about 3,000 million years. Sleepy fact number 45. Mars has dust storms that can swallow the whole planet. Every few years a regional storm gets going and feeds on itself, lifting more dust, which absorbs more sunlight, which heats the air, which raises more wind, until in a matter of weeks the entire surface disappears from view beneath a uniform tan haze and stays hidden for months. In 2018, one of those global storms blotted out the sun so completely that a solar-powered rover, which had been working for nearly 15 years, finally ran its batteries flat and never woke again. And yet, for all that, if you were standing in the middle of one, you would hardly be knocked about at all. The air on Mars is less than 1% as thick as ours, so even a wind blowing at 60 miles an hour carries almost no punch. It would tug faintly at your sleeve. What it would do is get everywhere, coating every panel and lens and joint in a fine grey-red powder, dimming everything, sifting into every seam, patient as time. Sleepy fact number 46. There are pieces of Mars sitting in museum drawers on Earth, and we did not have to go and fetch them. Every so often something large strikes Mars hard enough to fling fragments of the surface upward faster than the planet can hold them, and those fragments go into orbit around the Sun. And after a few million years of wandering, a small number of them cross our path and fall as meteorites. We have found a few hundred of them, and we can prove where they came from, because gas trapped in tiny bubbles inside the rock matches precisely and unmistakably the composition of the Martian atmosphere as measured by landers there. One of them, picked up on the ice of Antarctica, is over 4,000 million years old and caused a global sensation in the 1990s when structures inside it were suggested to be fossil microbes. That claim did not hold up, and the argument that followed was long and bad-tempered and enormously productive. But the plain fact remains gorgeous. Small pieces of another world land here, quietly, in deserts and on ice sheets, and lie about waiting for someone to notice. Sleepy fact number 47. In 2004, 2 rovers about the size of golf carts landed on opposite sides of Mars with a design life of 90 days. 90 days was the promise. One of them worked for 6 years. The other worked for nearly 15, and in that time it drove more than 26 miles across the surface, which is a marathon. So that a machine built for 3 months of careful pottering ended up running the distance of a marathon on another planet at an average speed of about 0.04 of a mile an hour. It climbed a crater rim to look at the view. It found evidence of ancient standing water. It survived winters by parking on slopes tilted toward the sun, like an old man turning his chair toward the window. And when the great storm of 2018 came, it sent one last set of readings home saying, in essence, that the sky was very dark, and its power was very low. And a journalist rendered that into plain words that went round the world, and people who had never cared about Mars in their lives felt a small, unexpected grief for a robot. It is still up there, on a slope, dusty and silent, pointed the way it was pointed on its last good afternoon. Sleepy fact number 48. And here is the sorrow underneath all of that, and the reason Mars is dry now. Mars is small. It is about half our diameter and only about 1/10 of our mass, and small worlds cool quickly, the way a small pan of water goes cold on the stove long before a large one does. Its interior cooled, its churning core slowed, and its magnetic field faded away and left the atmosphere unshielded. And so, over hundreds of millions of years, the solar wind simply blew that atmosphere off into space, thinning the air until the pressure was too low for liquid water to survive on the surface at all, and everything froze or fled. Yet the land itself is not small in the way you might imagine, because there are no oceans covering it. The dry land area of Mars is almost exactly the same as the dry land area of the Earth. Every continent, every desert, every mountain range we have ever walked on, laid out flat and empty and rust-coloured, under a butterscotch sky, with nobody on it at all. Let the mind go loose again for a moment. Nothing so far tonight has been anything you need to keep. Out on the ridge, the copper-coloured light in the east has climbed a little higher and paled a little as it rose, and the old man has closed his eyes for a while, without falling asleep, listening to the small wind coming over the stone. Beyond that light, out past the last of the 4 rocky worlds, the map of this solar system changes its character entirely. The neat inner rooms give way to a very large, very empty hall, and it takes a long while to cross, and there is a good deal of rubble lying about in it. That rubble has a bad reputation, mostly from films, and the reputation is entirely undeserved. Let us go out into it slowly. Sleepy fact number 49. The asteroid belt is empty. Almost unimaginably empty. In the pictures we are all shown, it is a swarming river of tumbling boulders through which a ship must dodge and weave, and in truth it is the loneliest place a machine can be. There are certainly a great many asteroids, well over 1 million of them large enough to have been catalogued, and countless smaller ones. But the volume of space they are spread through is so vast that the average distance between one asteroid and the next is something in the region of 600,000 miles, which is more than twice the distance from here to the moon. If you were standing on one of them, in the ordinary case, you would not see another one as anything more than a faint point of light indistinguishable from a star. Every spacecraft that has crossed the belt, and there have been a good many now, has crossed it without any special avoidance manoeuvres at all, and the engineers who plan those crossings do not worry about collisions in the slightest. And weighed all together, every single asteroid in the entire belt, added up, comes to something like 4% of the mass of our own moon. The most famous obstacle course in the solar system is a scattering of gravel across a hall the size of a continent. Sleepy fact number 50. There is one object out there big enough to be a world in its own right, and it holds about a third of the total mass of the belt all by itself. It is called Ceres, it is about 600 miles across, and it was discovered on the first night of the 19th century, on the first day of the year 1801, by a Sicilian monk with a telescope who was looking for something else entirely. For about 50 years afterwards it was listed in the textbooks as a planet, and schoolchildren learned it in the sequence between Mars and Jupiter, until so many other rocks were found out there that the whole category had to be rethought. It is round, because it is large enough that its own gravity has pulled it into a ball. It is dark and dusty on the outside, and probably has a great deal of water ice underneath, perhaps more fresh water than the Earth holds. And when a spacecraft finally went and looked at it closely, it found two startlingly bright spots on the floor of one crater, so bright they had shown up as a puzzle from a distance. They turned out to be deposits of salt, left behind where briny water had made its way up from below and evaporated away into space. Salt flats on a dwarf planet made by a buried sea. Sleepy fact number 51. The second largest thing out there is Vesta, and Vesta is not really an asteroid so much as the survivor of an interrupted childhood. It is a proper little layered world, with an iron core and a rocky mantle and a crust of ancient lava, which is to say it got most of the way to becoming a planet, and then stopped, because Jupiter's gravity kept stirring the neighbourhood too violently for anything to finish assembling. And something enormous hit its southern end. The crater left behind is about 300 miles across on a body, only around 330 miles wide, which means the scar takes up almost the whole of one end of it, and the impact carved a mountain in the centre of that basin, nearly as tall as Olympus Mons. It also blasted about 1% of Vesta clean off into space, and pieces of that debris still arrive here. Roughly 1 meteorite in 20 that lands on Earth is a chip of Vesta, and on a clear dark night, at the right time of year, Vesta is just barely bright enough to be seen with the naked eye, which makes it the only object in the asteroid belt you can ever look at directly for yourself. Sleepy fact number 52. The belt is not a shattered planet. It is a natural and rather beautiful mistake to think so, and it was the standard explanation for a long time, and there is even a lovely old name for the imagined world, Phaethon, the chariot driver who lost control of the sun. But the arithmetic does not work. Put every scrap of the belt back together, and you would get a body smaller than our moon, far too little material for a planet. What actually happened is that Jupiter formed early and formed enormous, and its gravity reached in across that region and stirred the little bodies there into faster and faster relative motion, so that when they met each other, they did not gently stick together and grow, as they were doing everywhere else, but smashed each other apart. The belt is not the wreckage of a planet that died. It is the raw material of a planet that was never allowed to be born, kept forever in pieces by the pull of a bigger brother next door. It is a building site where the work was stopped 4,500 million years ago, and nobody has been back since. Sleepy fact number 53. Asteroids have moons of their own. That was not expected at all, and it was discovered almost by accident in 1993 when a spacecraft on its way out to Jupiter flew past a lumpy 30-mile asteroid, and, in the pictures returned some months later, there was plainly a second smaller rock going round it. It has since turned out to be common. A great many asteroids travel in pairs, some of them nearly equal in size, slowly circling one another as they go about their orbit, held together by a whisper of gravity so faint that a person standing on one could throw a stone hard enough to escape it entirely. In 2022, one of those little pairs became the target of a genuinely extraordinary experiment. A spacecraft was flown deliberately into the smaller of the two at 14,000 miles an hour, purely to see whether we could change its path, and it worked considerably better than predicted, shortening the small moon's orbit by more than half an hour. It was the first time our species has ever intentionally altered the motion of another body in space. Sleepy fact number 54. Some asteroids are made of metal. Out in the belt there is a body called Psyche, about 140 miles across, which appears to be substantially iron and nickel rather than rock, and the leading idea is that it may be the exposed core of a small world whose outer layers were battered away in the violent early days. If that is right, then flying past it would be like being handed a cross-section of the inside of a planet, the part we can never dig down to at home because it lies 2,000 miles beneath our feet under unimaginable pressure and heat. There has been a great deal of excitable talk about what such an object might be worth. If you could somehow bring it home and sell it, with numbers so absurdly large that they stop being money and become a kind of joke. The real value is nothing of the sort. It is that we have never once seen the metal heart of a world from the outside, and there may be one out there lying open like a cut fruit. Sleepy fact number 55. There are asteroids that share Jupiter's orbit, running along in front of it and behind it, and they do not fall in, and they do not drift away. They sit in two places where the pull of the Sun and the pull of Jupiter balance out in such a way that a small object can settle and stay, 60 degrees ahead of the giant planet and 60 degrees behind it. There are many thousands of them in each of those two swarms, so many that they may be as numerous as everything in the main belt put together, and they have been sitting there very nearly since the beginning, undisturbed, which makes them some of the least altered material anywhere in the solar system. They are the leftovers that never got stirred. A mission is out there now, planned to spend 12 years quietly visiting one after another of them, and it was named after a fossil, which is exactly right, because that is what they are. Fossils of the disk we were all made from, parked in the two safest laybys in the solar system. Sleepy fact number 56. That shooting star you saw once on a summer night, the one that made you catch your breath, was almost certainly a grain of sand. Most meteors are made by particles between the size of a grain of sand and a small pebble, entering the atmosphere at 30 or 40 miles a second and heating the air in front of them until it glows. The light you see is not the object burning. It is the air, superheated and shining, 60 miles above your head, in a streak that lasts less than a second. And they arrive in showers on a schedule you can put in a diary, because the Earth's orbit crosses the dusty trails left behind by particular comets at the same point every year, so that the same nights in August and December and November bring the same reliable rain of light. Year after year, century after century. The stones that make August shower were shed by a comet that comes round only once in about 130 years, and the dust has been spreading along its path for millennia, and we drive through it every summer like a car through a cloud of midges. Sleepy fact number 57. Something falls out of the sky onto this planet every single day, and it is a good deal more than you would guess. The estimates run somewhere between 40 and 100 tons of material arriving daily, almost all of it as dust so fine that it drifts down unnoticed and settles on everything. It is on your roof. It is in your gutters. People have taken to sieving the grit from flat rooftops with magnets and picking out, under a microscope, tiny dark glassy spheres that formed when a speck of the solar system melted on its way through the air above the house. Occasionally something rather larger comes in. In 2013 a rock about 60 feet across entered the atmosphere over the Ural Mountains at nearly 40,000 miles an hour, broke apart high above a city, and released a shockwave that blew in windows across 6 towns. Nobody had seen it coming, because it approached out of the direction of the sun, which is the one part of the sky we cannot watch. Sleepy fact number 58. And once in a very long while, something arrives that changes everything. 66 million years ago an object something like 6 miles across came in at an angle over what is now the Gulf of Mexico, and struck limestone and shallow sea, punching a crater more than 100 miles wide and throwing a spray of molten rock so high that much of it left the atmosphere and came back down all over the world, turning the whole sky to an oven for an hour or two. Then came the dark, as dust and sulphur closed the sky for years, and the plants failed, and the long chain of things that ate plants and things that ate those failed after them, and 3/4 of all the species on Earth ended. The crater is still there, buried under 1/2 mile of later rock, found by geologists who were looking for oil. And in the thin grey layer that marks that day in the rocks of the world, there is a great deal of iridium, an element that is rare in the Earth's crust and common in asteroids. The whole history of the mammals, and therefore of you lying there listening, sits directly on top of that line. We have crossed the empty hall now, and it took a very long time, and there is nothing to show for the crossing but a little scattered gravel and a good deal of dark. Let the breath go out slowly. Out on the ridge, the night has deepened into that particular stillness that arrives some hours after sunset, when even the ground has stopped ticking and cooling. The old man has slid a little further down against his boulder. And high in the south, brighter than anything else up there tonight except the copper light of the war god, there is a great steady lamp of a star that does not flicker, hanging in the dark with a kind of patience about it. Anyone with a pair of ordinary binoculars, resting their elbows on a fence post, can point them at that light and see 3 or 4 smaller sparks arranged in a neat line beside it. That line is the thing that broke open the sky for us. Let us go and stand off the shoulder of the largest world in this family. Sleepy fact number 59. Jupiter is not simply the biggest planet. Jupiter is more than twice as massive as every other planet in the solar system put together, with all their moons and rings and every asteroid and comet thrown in as well. You could pour about 1,300 Earths into the volume it takes up. Its great red spot alone is wider than our entire world, and it is so heavy that it does something none of the other planets manage. Every object in a two-body system pulls on its partner, so that neither one truly circles the other, and both instead swing around a shared balance point between them. For every other planet, that balance point sits comfortably inside the Sun. For Jupiter, it does not. The balance point between Jupiter and the Sun lies just outside the Sun's surface, a little way above it, which means that strictly speaking Jupiter does not orbit the Sun at all. The two of them orbit each other around a point in empty space, and the Sun goes round it in a small, slow circle once every 12 years, wobbling very slightly like a man swinging a heavy bag. That wobble, seen from far away, is exactly the sort of clue by which we have found planets around other stars. Sleepy fact number 60. There is a storm on Jupiter that people have been watching on and off for more than 350 years. It is an oval of ochre and salmon and brick red, turning anti-clockwise, with winds around its edge running at about 270 miles an hour, and it is currently wide enough to swallow the Earth with room to spare. When astronomers first drew it in the 1600s, it may have been more than twice that size. There is nothing beneath it. No coastline to break it up, no mountain range to bleed off its energy, no ground of any kind to slow the winds by friction. So a storm that gets going on Jupiter has very little reason ever to stop. It simply rolls between two bands of atmosphere, moving in opposite directions, like a marble held between two moving belts, spinning on and on. It has been shrinking noticeably over the last century and becoming rounder as it does, and nobody can say whether we are watching the long ending of it or merely one of its moods. Somewhere in the world tonight there is a telescope pointed at it, as there has been on almost every clear night since the invention of the telescope. Sleepy fact number 61. You cannot land on Jupiter, and not merely because it would be uncomfortable. There is nothing there to land on. Descend into it, and you would fall first through ammonia clouds, then through water clouds, with the pressure and the heat climbing steadily, and the light dimming to a dull orange glow, and at no point would you cross a surface. Instead, the gas would gradually become thicker and hotter, and less gas-like, thickening past the point where the distinction between gas and liquid means anything at all, until you were falling through something more like a hot dense soup, with no boundary anywhere in it. Go deeper still, where the pressure is millions of times what you feel now, and the hydrogen itself gives up its ordinary behaviour, its electrons come loose, and it starts to conduct electricity like a metal. Most of Jupiter, by volume, is an ocean of liquid metallic hydrogen thousands of miles deep, churning slowly in the dark. And it is that ocean, turning as the planet turns, That generates the most powerful magnetic field of any planet in the solar system, and a spacecraft did once go in on purpose, released as a probe in 1995. It transmitted for 58 minutes before the heat and pressure took it, and it had reached less than 1/100th of the way to the centre. Sleepy fact number 62. That magnetic field is a monstrous thing. It is around 20,000 times stronger than the Earth's, and it holds belts of trapped radiation so intense that an unprotected human being at the orbit of the inner moons would receive a lethal dose in a matter of minutes. Spacecraft sent there have had to carry their electronics inside armoured vaults of titanium, and even then their instruments slowly degrade. If you could see that magnetic bubble from Earth with your naked eye, it would appear several times wider than the full moon, despite lying 500 million miles away, which would make it, by a wide margin, the largest structure in our sky. And where it funnels charged particles down onto the poles, it lights auroras hundreds of times more powerful than ours. Permanent shifting crowns of ultraviolet light around each pole, some of them fed by material thrown off by the volcanic moon nearby. Everything about that planet is our own world's arrangements, made vast and made merciless. Sleepy fact number 63. In the winter of 1609, a man in Padua pointed a homemade telescope at that bright unflickering lamp, and saw 3 little stars in a line beside it. He went back the next night, expecting them to have been left behind as Jupiter moved, and instead they had rearranged themselves. He watched night after night, and a 4th appeared, and he understood what he was looking at. Those 4 points of light were moons going round Jupiter, and that meant, plainly and undeniably, that not everything in the heavens went around the Earth. It is difficult now to feel how enormous that was. The whole architecture of the sky, as taught for 1,500 years, was overturned by 4 dots in a cheap tube. Jupiter has since turned out to have more than 90 moons, most of them small captured rocks in odd tilted orbits, and the count keeps rising as our telescopes improve. But it is those first 4 that matter. And they are still there, and you can still see them yourself. Tonight, from a garden, with binoculars borrowed from a neighbour. Sleepy fact number 664. The innermost of the 4 is a world called Io, which is about the size of our moon, and is the most volcanically violent object in the entire solar system. It has something like 400 active volcanoes, and some of them throw plumes of sulphur and sulphur dioxide 200 miles straight up, so high that the material leaves the moon altogether and forms a donut-shaped ring of gas along its orbit. The whole surface is a nightmare of yellows and oranges and greenish-white, with black lava lakes and no impact craters anywhere, because the entire face of the moon is repaved with fresh eruption faster than craters can accumulate. And the reason for all this is not internal heat left over from its formation, which so small a body would have lost long ago. It is squeezing. Io is caught between the enormous pull of Jupiter and the tugs of the neighbouring moons, and it is flexed back and forth in its orbit constantly, its solid surface rising and falling by as much as 300 feet, and all that kneading heats the interior the way a paperclip gets hot when you bend it repeatedly. It is a moon being cooked by being bent. Sleepy fact number 65. The next one out is, to my mind, the most interesting place in the solar system after this one. Europa is a little smaller than our moon, and it is wrapped in a shell of water ice so smooth and so young that it is one of the flattest objects we know, with hardly any craters and a surface crazed all over with long brown cracks like a cracked glaze on a bowl. Underneath that shell, the evidence is now very strong indeed. There is a global ocean of liquid salt water, perhaps 60 miles deep, kept liquid by the same tidal kneading that tortures Io. That ocean, on a moon smaller than ours, may contain twice as much liquid water as every ocean on Earth put together. It sits in permanent darkness under miles of ice. It is very probably in contact with a rocky seafloor, which is where the interesting chemistry would happen. And there are hints that plumes of water occasionally vent up through the cracks. If there is life anywhere else in this solar system, the odds are good that it is there, in the dark, under the ice, and has been getting on quietly with its business for 4,000 million years. Sleepy fact number 66. The third of the four is Ganymede, and Ganymede is the largest moon in the solar system by a comfortable margin. It is bigger than the planet Mercury. If it were orbiting the Sun on its own instead of orbiting Jupiter, nobody would hesitate to call it a planet. It has an old dark cratered terrain crossed by younger pale grooved bands, hundreds of miles long, which look like nothing else anywhere. It very likely has a salty ocean of its own buried deep beneath the ice, sandwiched between layers of exotic high-pressure ice above and below. And it has something no other moon has at all. Ganymede generates its own magnetic field from a molten iron core, and that field carves out a small magnetic bubble of its own inside the vast bubble of Jupiter's, a magnetosphere within a magnetosphere, with its own auroras flickering faintly over its poles. A moon with its own weather in a giant's field. Sleepy fact number 67. The outermost of the four is Callisto, and Callisto is the quiet one. It is almost the same size as Mercury, it is not caught in the tidal wrestling match that torments the inner three, and so nothing has happened there for a very long time. Its face is the most heavily cratered surface known anywhere in the solar system, so saturated with impacts that new craters can only erase old ones, and it has been recording that bombardment more or less unchanged for 4,000 million years. There is one enormous bullseye basin with rings spreading out from it, like ripples frozen in a pond. And because it orbits well outside the worst of the radiation belts, Callisto is, oddly enough, the one large moon of Jupiter where a person could stand for a while without being killed by the environment within the hour, which has made it a favourite in the sort of plans people draw up for centuries from now. The dullest world in the neighbourhood turns out to be the only doorstep you could sit on. Sleepy fact number 68. In the summer of 1994, a comet that had been torn into more than 20 pieces by Jupiter's gravity on an earlier pass came back and fell into the planet, one fragment after another over 6 days, and the world watched it happen with every telescope it had. The impacts left dark bruises in the cloud tops, some of them larger than the Earth, which took months to fade. It was the first time anyone had ever watched two bodies in the solar system collide, and it changed the conversation about our own risks in a way no calculation had managed. For a long time afterwards, it was said that Jupiter acts as a great shield for the inner planets, hoovering up comets that might otherwise come our way, and there is something in that. There is also the opposite argument, that Jupiter's gravity flings just as much material inward as it absorbs. The honest answer is that it does both, and that the world you are lying on has been shaped over billions of years by the whims of a gas giant 500 million miles away that has never once known we are here. Let us rest here a moment before going further out. You have travelled a long way tonight without moving at all, which is the only sort of travelling that is any good at this hour. If you have lost the thread, there is no thread. If you have forgotten the last 4 facts entirely, that is exactly what they were for. On the ridge, the old man's chin has come down toward his chest, and the blanket has settled, and his breathing has slowed into the long, even rhythm of somebody who is not quite awake and not quite asleep and is in no particular hurry to choose. The sky has wheeled a little further over, and out beyond that bright, unflickering lamp we were just standing beside, twice as far again from the sun, there is a paler, slower, yellower point of light, moving so lazily against the stars that it takes nearly 30 years to make its way once round the sky. The old astronomers gave it the name of the god of time and patience and the harvest, and of all the things that human beings have ever pointed a telescope at, this is the one that has made the most people go quiet. Sleepy fact number 69. Saturn would float. It is the least dense planet in the solar system, made overwhelmingly of hydrogen and helium and puffed up enormously by its own internal heat, and its average density is only about 7/10 that of water. So if you could find a bathtub large enough, a tub some 75,000 miles across, and fill it, and lower Saturn gently into it, the planet would bob, riding a little high in the water like a beach ball, leaving a ring of scum around the edge as people are fond of pointing out. It is a silly image, and it is also true, and it tells you something serious about what these outer worlds actually are. They are not big versions of the ground you are lying on. There is no ground. Saturn is 9 times wider than the Earth and holds 95 times our mass, and yet the stuff of it is so light and so spread out that a cupful of the average of it would weigh less than a cupful of water from the tap. Sleepy fact number 70. The rings are the flattest thing in nature. They stretch out to something like 175,000 miles across, which is nearly 3/4 of the way from the Earth to the Moon, and over most of that vast width they are, in places, only about 30 feet thick. Some parts are thinner still. To get the proportions right, imagine a disc of paper the width of a football pitch, and thinner than the paper actually is. If you shrank the rings down to the size of a dinner plate, they would be far thinner than the thinnest tissue you could buy. And they are not solid, nor are they dust. They are made of countless separate lumps of almost pure water ice, mostly from the size of a grain of sugar to the size of a house, each one on its own individual orbit around the planet, all of them going round in the same plane like an endless silent traffic of chandelier pieces. Fly through them, and you would find not a sheet but a bright crowded blizzard, drifting past your window at walking pace, because everything nearby is going in the same direction at almost the same speed. Sleepy fact number 71. And here is the fact that startles people most. The rings are almost certainly temporary, and they are almost certainly young. The ice in them is astonishingly clean, far cleaner than it should be if it had been sitting out there for 4,000 million years, collecting the dark dust that drifts through this solar system. Measurements of the mass of the rings and of the rate at which material is currently falling out of them and raining down into Saturn's atmosphere point, tentatively but persistently. To a system perhaps only 100 million years old, and one that may be substantially gone in another 100 million. Which means that when the last dinosaurs were walking around down here, Saturn may have had no rings at all, or was just then acquiring them, perhaps from a moon that wandered too close and was pulled apart. And in 100 million years there may be nothing there but a plain yellow ball. We arrived, as a species with our little glass lenses, during the brief interval when the most beautiful object in the solar system happened to exist. Sleepy fact number 72. There is a hexagon at the north pole of Saturn. Not a rough approximation of one, a genuine 6-sided shape with 6 straight edges and 6 corners, drawn in the clouds around the pole, about 20,000 miles across, wide enough to drop 3 or 4 Earths into. It was first seen when the Voyagers went past in the early 1980s, and it was still there, in the same place, unchanged in its geometry, when another spacecraft arrived 30 years later, though its colour had shifted from blue toward gold as the northern season changed. It is a jet stream running at about 200 miles an hour, and it has settled into that shape because of the way the winds shear against one another at different latitudes. People have reproduced it in the laboratory in a spinning bucket of fluid and got neat polygons out of it. Triangles and squares and hexagons depending on the speed. Knowing that does not make it any less peculiar to look at. A shape you would draw with a ruler on a planet with no solid surface, holding its form for at least half a century. Sleepy fact number 73. Nobody knew how long a day on Saturn was until quite recently, and the reason is delightful. On a rocky world you time the day by watching a landmark come round. Saturn has no landmarks, only clouds that move at different speeds at different latitudes, and unlike Jupiter its magnetic field is so nearly perfectly aligned with its axis that it gives no usable wobble to time either. Estimates disagreed by many minutes, which is a scandal when you are measuring something so basic. The answer came, in the end, from the rings. Waves ripple through the ring material in response to the sloshing of the planet's interior, in the same way that a seismologist reads the inside of the Earth from the shaking at the surface. And by reading those ripples, the interior rhythm was pinned down at last. 10 hours, 33 minutes and 38 seconds. The rings turned out to be a seismograph 170,000 miles wide, laid out flat around the planet, patiently recording its heartbeat. Sleepy fact number 74. Saturn's largest moon, Titan, is the only place other than the Earth where we have ever found standing liquid on the surface of a world. It is bigger than Mercury, and it is the only moon anywhere with a proper thick atmosphere, mostly nitrogen like ours, so dense that the pressure on the ground is half again what you feel now, and so hazy with orange organic smog that we could not see the surface at all until we sent radar and infrared to look through it. And what is down there is a landscape that is uncannily familiar and entirely alien at once. There are river valleys and dunes of dark grains hundreds of miles long, and lakes and seas in the northern polar region, some of them the size of the Great Lakes. But it is far too cold for water there, at nearly 180 degrees below zero, so the water ice is the bedrock, hard as granite. And the liquid running in those rivers and filling those seas is methane and ethane. It rains there slowly in large fat drops that fall gently through the thick air. And because the gravity is weak and the atmosphere is dense, a person on Titan could strap a pair of wings to their arms and with a bit of effort actually fly. Sleepy fact number 75. There is a small moon of Saturn, only about 300 miles across, that is spraying the contents of its own ocean into space. Enceladus is white and brilliant, the most reflective object in the solar system, and across its southern pole there are 4 long parallel fissures that were nicknamed the Tiger Stripes. Out of those fissures come more than 100 geysers of water vapor and ice grains, jetting hundreds of miles up, some of the material falling back as snow, and some escaping altogether to form one of Saturn's outer rings. Which meant that a passing spacecraft could do something nobody had dared hope for. It could fly straight through the plume and taste the inside of another world's ocean without ever landing. And what it tasted was salt water, and silica grains of the kind formed in hot water at a rocky seafloor, and molecular hydrogen and complex organic molecules. That is very nearly a shopping list for the environments where life is thought to have got started here, coming out of a moon you could drive across in a long weekend. Sleepy fact number 76. Saturn keeps a cabinet of curiosities. There is Iapetus, a moon with one hemisphere as dark as coal and the other as bright as fresh snow, an oddity noticed as early as the 1600s because it was visible on one side of Saturn and vanished on the other, and which we now understand comes from dark dust swept up on its leading face. That same moon also has a ridge of mountains running almost exactly along its equator, 10 miles high, giving it the silhouette of a walnut, and nobody is sure how it got there. There is Mimas, small and pale, with a single crater a third of the width of the whole moon, giving it a face so uncannily like a certain fictional battle station that the resemblance is now impossible to unsee. There is Hyperion, shaped like a sponge and tumbling chaotically, so that its day has no fixed length at all. And there are more than 140 moons in all, most of them small dark captured things in wide tilted orbits, still being counted. Sleepy fact number 77. In September of 2017, a spacecraft that had been working at Saturn for 13 years was deliberately destroyed. It had been sent on a final series of orbits, threading the 2,000-mile gap between the innermost ring and the cloud tops. A route nobody would have risked at any earlier point in the mission, because a single ice pebble would have ended it, and it had sent home the closest pictures of that planet ever taken. Then, low on fuel, it was turned to point at the atmosphere and flown deliberately into it, transmitting all the way down until it broke apart and burned. It was killed on purpose by the people who had built it and worked with it for 2 decades, for one reason. Its plutonium heart and any earthly microbes still clinging to it could not be allowed to fall by accident, someday, onto Enceladus or Titan and contaminate an ocean we now think might be inhabited. It is a small and quite moving piece of housekeeping. We tidied up after ourselves in the outer solar system. Sleepy fact number 78. Twice in every one of Saturn's 29.5-year circuits of the Sun, the rings turn edge onto us, and because they are so absurdly thin, they simply disappear. For a few days, the most spectacular object in the sky is a plain pale ball with a thin dark line drawn across it, and then not even that. When it happened in the summer of 1612, the man who had first seen the rings and had described them as a pair of handles or companions on either side of the planet, looked again and found them gone, and wrote that he did not know what to say about so strange a thing, and wondered whether the planet had devoured its own children, as the god it was named for had done. He never worked out what he was looking at. It took another 40-odd years and a better telescope for someone to realize that Saturn was encircled by a thin, flat ring touching it nowhere. That is worth remembering when a night sky puzzles you. The finest observer of his age spent his last years baffled by a shape we now put on the front of children's lunchboxes. And now we go out into the true dark, where the sun is no longer a disk but a small fierce point, and the light that falls is 1/5 of 1% of what falls on your window at home, and everything is slow and cold and blue. Only one machine has ever been to either of the last two worlds we are going to visit, and it went past both of them in a hurry in the 1980s and never went back, and nobody has been since. Almost everything we know about these two planets comes from a handful of days of photographs taken by a machine built before home computers, plus whatever we have managed to squint at through telescopes in the 40 years since. They are the least visited, least understood, least loved places in this family. Let us go and be kind to them for a little while. Sleepy fact number 79. Uranus is lying on its side. Every other planet spins more or less upright as it goes around the Sun, tilted by a modest amount. The way ours is tilted by 23.5 degrees. Uranus is tipped over by 98 degrees, which means its axis lies almost exactly in the plane of its orbit, and it does not so much spin as roll around the Sun like a barrel. And because it takes 84 years to make that circuit, the seasons there are beyond anything we have words for. For 42 years at a stretch, the northern pole points more or less at the Sun, and the entire northern half of the planet has continuous daylight, while the southern half has continuous night. Then slowly the geometry swings around, and for 42 years the arrangement reverses. A human lifetime would not cover a single Uranian year, and the tilt does something almost paradoxical to the sunshine, because over the course of that long year the poles receive more heat than the equator does, which is the opposite of the arrangement here. Something very large is thought to have struck it early on and knocked it over, though quite what and where that impactor went, we do not know. Sleepy fact number 80. Uranus is the first planet anybody ever discovered. The other 5 visible planets have simply been known, for as long as there have been people looking up, wandering among the fixed stars, and named in every ancient language. Then, in March of 1781, a musician and amateur astronomer in the city of Bath, sweeping the sky with a telescope he had ground and polished himself, came upon a small greenish disk that was not a star. He thought at first it was a comet. Within months it was clear that it was a new planet, twice as far out as Saturn, and at a stroke, the known solar system doubled in size. He proposed naming it after the king who was to be his patron, which would have given us a solar system running from Mercury to George, and the rest of Europe declined with some firmness. It made him famous, it earned him a royal pension, and it let him give up teaching music and spend the remainder of his life building the largest telescopes in the world, with his sister working beside him through every cold night. Sleepy fact number 81. Uranus is the coldest place in the solar system that has an atmosphere. The lowest temperature ever measured in its cloud tops is about 224 degrees below zero, and that is colder than Neptune, which is a full 1,000 million miles further out from the Sun and ought by every reasonable expectation to be colder still. The explanation seems to be that Uranus, alone among the 4 giants, has almost no internal heat left to give. Jupiter and Saturn and Neptune all radiate substantially more energy than they receive from the Sun, still leaking out warmth left over from their formation, and from the slow settling of their interiors. Uranus radiates almost exactly what it takes in, and nothing more. Whatever great collision knocked it onto its side may also have jolted its interior heat out of it early, or perhaps some layering deep inside is trapping the warmth and refusing to let it convect upward. Either way, it is a world with a cold heart, and it shows in the featureless, pale, almost bland blue-green face it turns to us. A planet that has very little weather because it has very little left to drive any. Sleepy fact, number 82. Uranus has rings, and they were found in a way I have always loved. In 1977, astronomers arranged to watch the planet pass in front of a distant star, hoping to learn about its atmosphere from how the starlight dimmed as it slipped behind the edge. They flew the observation aboard an aeroplane with a telescope in its side, high above the weather, and well before the planet reached the star blinked. It blinked again. 5 times it winked out briefly, and then, after the planet had passed, it blinked 5 more times on the other side in the mirror image of the same pattern. There was only one possible explanation. Something was there. In narrow bands on both sides of the planet, symmetrically, Uranus had rings, and they were narrow and dark and had been invisible to every telescope ever pointed at it. They are made of some of the blackest material in the solar system, reflecting only a % or 2 of the light that hits them, which is why nobody had ever seen them. Sleepy fact number 83. The moons of Uranus are named not after gods, but after characters from Shakespeare and from one poem of Alexander Pope, so that circling that cold blue world tonight are Titania and Oberon, Ariel and Umbriel, Puck, Ophelia, Desdemona, Juliet, and Miranda. And Miranda is the strangest of them. It is a small moon, less than 300 miles across, and its surface looks as though it were assembled by somebody in a hurry out of mismatched pieces, with great oval racetrack patterns of grooves set against ancient cratered plains, and boundaries between terrains that make no sense at all. On one edge of it there is a cliff called Verona Rupes, which is, by most measurements, the tallest cliff face anywhere in the solar system. Something like 7 to 12 miles from lip to floor. The gravity there is so feeble that if you stepped off the top you would fall for about 12 minutes before you reached the bottom. You would have time to become bored on the way down. We know all of this from a single flypast in January of 1986, and nothing has been back since. Sleepy fact number 84. Neptune was found with a pen. By the 1840s it was clear that Uranus was not moving quite as it should, running ahead of where the table said it ought to be for a while, and then falling behind, as though something further out were tugging at it. 2 mathematicians, working separately and in different countries, took that misbehaviour and worked backwards from it, calculating where an unseen planet would have to be and how massive to produce exactly that pattern of error. One of them sent his prediction to an observatory in Berlin. They pointed the telescope at the given coordinates on the very first night, in September of 1846, and there it was, within 1 degree of the spot, a small blue disk that had never been catalogued. It remains one of the most astonishing things our species has ever done. A planet 2,500 million miles away, never seen, never suspected, was located by arithmetic on paper and then simply looked at to confirm it. Sleepy fact number 85. Neptune has the fastest winds in the solar system. Out there where sunlight is 1,000th of what we get and there is scarcely any energy arriving to drive anything at all, the winds in the upper atmosphere blow it up to about 1,200 miles an hour. That is faster than the speed of sound in the air here at home. Nobody has a fully satisfying explanation for why the most distant and most poorly lit of the planets should be the most violent, though the internal heat still leaking out of it clearly plays a part. When the one spacecraft that has ever visited went past, it photographed a dark storm the size of the Earth in the southern hemisphere, and a small bright cloud racing round the planet so quickly that the mission team nicknamed it the Scooter. When the Hubble telescope looked a few years later, the great dark storm had entirely vanished, and a new one had appeared in the northern hemisphere instead. These storms come and go on a scale of years, unlike Jupiter's ancient red one, which suggests that whatever holds a storm together there is quite different. Sleepy fact number 86. It very probably rains diamonds on Neptune, and on Uranus too. Deep inside those planets there is a thick hot mantle of water and ammonia and methane under pressures hundreds of thousands of times what you feel now. Squeeze methane hard enough and it breaks apart, and the carbon left over is pressed into crystals of diamond, which are denser than everything around them, and so begin to sink, drifting down through the hot slush toward the core, possibly for thousands of miles, perhaps eventually forming a warm ocean of liquid carbon at the bottom, with diamond icebergs floating in it. This is not idle speculation. Laboratories have shot enormously powerful lasers into plastic to reproduce those conditions for a fraction of a second, and watched nanodiamonds form exactly as predicted. So when someone tells you it rains diamonds on the ice giants, they are being roughly accurate, though the picture to hold in mind is less a glittering shower, and more a slow eternal snowfall of grit, sinking through hot dark syrup, in the middle of a world nobody has ever seen. Sleepy fact number 87. Neptune's largest moon does not belong to it. Triton is bigger than Pluto, and it goes around Neptune backwards, against the direction of the planet's own spin, which is something no moon that formed alongside its planet could possibly do. It must have been captured, seized as it wandered past from the belt of icy bodies further out, and the capture would have been a violent business that likely destroyed whatever original moons Neptune had. And Triton is not dead. Its surface is young, pink and white and only lightly cratered, patterned in a texture that got nicknamed cantaloupe terrain, and when the spacecraft flew by it, photographed dark plumes rising 5 miles from the southern polar cap and being smeared sideways by winds, geysers of nitrogen erupting on the coldest surface ever measured anywhere. 235 degrees below zero, and because its orbit is backwards, tidal forces are slowly dragging it inward. In some tens of millions of years, Triton will come too close and be torn apart, and Neptune will acquire a ring system that may briefly rival Saturn's. Sleepy fact number 88. A year on Neptune lasts almost 165 of ours, and this produces a rather beautiful anniversary. Neptune was discovered in 1846. It completed its very first full orbit since the moment of its discovery in the summer of 2011, at which point the planet returned to precisely the same spot among the stars where the Berlin telescope had first caught it, and had, in a sense, its first birthday under our observation. Everyone who witnessed the discovery had been dead for a century. 2 world wars had come and gone. The telescope that found it was long since a museum piece, and the mathematics that predicted it was being taught to teenagers. And the planet had simply gone round once, slowly, in the cold, at 3 miles a second, taking no notice at all. It will complete its second orbit since discovery in the year 2175. Somebody will probably mark it. And before we go out past the last of the planets, there is something I should tell you, because it belongs with the story we started the night on, and it is easy to leave out. The 2 machines we have been following are not the only things out there. They were not even first. 5 years before them, 2 smaller and simpler probes went out along much the same road, built by a different team, sent partly to find out whether the asteroid belt could be crossed at all, and whether anything could survive the radiation around Jupiter, because at the time nobody was confident about either. They were the scouts. One of them flew past Jupiter in 1973 and became the first object to cross the belt and the first to see that planet close up. The other went on to Saturn and gave us our first real look at its rings from nearby, and in doing so it flew the risky path so that the machines coming behind could be routed more safely. They were the ones sent ahead into the dark to see whether the dark was survivable, and they carry letters too, though simpler ones. Bolted to each is a small gold anodized aluminium plaque, about 6 inches by 9, etched with a diagram. There is a drawing of a man and a woman, the man with his hand raised. There is an outline of the spacecraft behind them for scale. There is a map of a sort showing the position of our Sun relative to 14 pulsars, those rapidly spinning collapsed stars that flash with such fantastic regularity that each one is effectively a lighthouse with its own unmistakable signature, and beside each one is marked its period in a form that any physicist anywhere would recognize. Because pulsars slow down at known rates, that map is also a date stamp. Anyone who found the plaque could work out both where it came from and roughly when it was launched. It was drawn in a hurry, in about 3 weeks, when somebody realized late in the day that these would be the first human objects to leave the solar system, and that it seemed a shame to send them empty-handed. And they have both gone quiet now. The first of them sent its last faint signal in January of 2003 from about 7,500 million miles out, and by then its power had dwindled so far that there was not enough left to run a transmitter that could reach us. Its sibling had fallen silent 8 years earlier, its antenna no longer able to be pointed at us at all. Both are still travelling, one toward the constellation of the Bull and one toward the constellation of the Eagle. Dead, dark, tumbling slowly, carrying their little gold plaques with the raised hand and the map of the pulsars. They will pass near a star, one of them, in about 2 million years. Nobody will be listening when they do. I find I do not experience that as sad, though it took me a while to work out why. It is because nothing was wasted. Everything those two machines were built to do, they did, and they did it early enough that the ones behind them could be sent with confidence. And that is what happens to almost everything anybody makes. It works for a while, it does what it can, it hands on what it learned, and then it stops, and goes on existing quietly somewhere without doing anything in particular. There are 4 of them out there now, on 4 different headings, 2 silent and 2 nearly so, all 4 moving away from the same small point of light at tens of thousands of miles an hour, in the 4 different directions the geometry of the tour happened to give them. And there is a 5th further behind, the machine that went to Pluto and photographed its frozen heart, also on an escape path, also destined never to return, still working, still reporting, still crossing the outer belt in the dark. 5 letters posted in 5 directions. That is the whole of our mail, so far, to whatever is out there. And now let us go on past Neptune, into the cold flat rubble beyond it, where the sun is a point, and the years are centuries, and everything is patient. We are a very long way out now. Let your body get heavier where it rests. Out here the sun has become a single brilliant point among the other stars, still by far the brightest of them, still bright enough to cast a faint shadow, but no longer anything you could call a source of daylight. Noon in this part of the solar system looks like an hour after sunset at home on a clear evening. And yet there is a great deal out here, more objects than in all the inner solar system put together, drifting slowly in the cold, taking centuries to go once around. On the ridge the old man has gone under at last. The blanket has slipped again, and he has not noticed. His breathing is deep and unhurried, and the sky is turning quietly above him, and there is nothing out here that will disturb him. Sleepy fact number 89. Pluto is smaller than our moon. That is the fact that undoes most people, because Pluto occupies such a large place in the imagination of anyone who learned the planets as a child. It is about 1,400 miles across, roughly the width of the United States, less than 20% of the mass of our moon. It was found in 1930 by a farm boy from Kansas with no university degree, who had sent his careful drawings of Jupiter and Mars to an observatory in Arizona hoping for advice, and was offered a job instead, and who then spent months comparing photographic plates 2 at a time in a blink comparator, looking for the one dot in hundreds of thousands that had shifted. He found it in February, aged 24. 76 years later, long after his death, the object he found was reclassified as a dwarf planet, which caused a public row far out of proportion to its scientific weight. And 9 years after that, a spacecraft flew past Pluto at 30,000 miles an hour and sent home the first close pictures of it, and it carried. in a small container bolted to its frame, an ounce of that man's ashes. He is the only person whose remains have left the solar system. Sleepy fact number 90. Before that flypast, everybody expected Pluto to be a dead, dark, cratered lump. Everybody was wrong. What came back was a world with a vast pale heart-shaped plain of nitrogen ice, hundreds of miles across. So smooth and so young that not a single impact crater can be found on it, meaning the surface there is being renewed continuously. The nitrogen ice is slowly convecting, turning over in enormous polygonal cells like the top of a pot of soup that has not quite reached the boil, each cell perhaps 20 miles wide, each turnover taking hundreds of thousands of years. There are mountains of water ice 2 miles high, standing up like bedrock, because at those temperatures water ice is as hard as granite. There are what appear to be glaciers of nitrogen flowing down valleys and pooling at the bottom. There is a delicate blue haze in the atmosphere, layered like a stack of thin veils, photographed as the spacecraft looked back at the sun through it. A world 3,000 million miles from the sun, which ought to have frozen solid and stopped, is still alive and still rearranging its own face. Sleepy fact number 91. Pluto and its largest moon, Charon, are as near to a double world as anything we have. Charon is about half Pluto's diameter, which is an enormous ratio, and the balance point between the two of them lies outside Pluto altogether, in the empty space between them. So Charon does not go around Pluto. The two of them dance around a point in the void, like two skaters holding hands and leaning back, and they are locked to each other completely. Pluto keeps one face permanently toward Charon, and Charon keeps one face permanently toward Pluto, so that if you stood on the correct side of Pluto, Charon would hang in your sky, enormous, 7 times wider than our moon looks, going through its phases, and it would never rise, and never set, and never move from that one spot, for as long as you lived, and for as long as anyone after you lived. And if you walked round to the other side, you would never see it at all, and would have to be told it existed. Sleepy fact number 92. For 20 years, Pluto was closer to the Sun than Neptune. Its orbit is a long stretched oval, tilted well out of the flat plane the planets keep to, and between 1979 and 1999, it swung in nearer to the Sun than Neptune ever comes. So an entire generation of schoolchildren learned about 9 planets, while the 8th and 9th were at that moment in the wrong order. And yet the two can never collide, and never even come near one another, because they are locked in a rhythm. Pluto goes around the Sun exactly twice for every 3 circuits Neptune makes, and that ratio means that every time Pluto comes in to the part of its orbit that crosses Neptune's path, Neptune is reliably somewhere else entirely, far round the other side. They have been keeping that appointment and missing each other by hundreds of millions of miles, for thousands of millions of years. It is not luck. It is the sort of arrangement that gravity settles into and then holds indefinitely, like 2 clocks in the same room falling into step. Sleepy fact number 93. Pluto is not alone out there, and that is exactly why it lost its old title. Beyond Neptune there is a broad flat belt of icy bodies, thousands of which have now been catalogued, and there are certainly hundreds of thousands more. In 2005 one of them was found that appeared to be about Pluto's size and turned out to be more massive still, and that forced the question that had been politely avoided for decades. Either the solar system had 10 planets, or 12, or possibly 50, or the word planet had to be tightened up. The astronomers voted controversially for tightening it, and in 2019 a spacecraft flew past one of those small distant bodies, a thing only 20 miles long, and found 2 rounded lobes joined gently at a narrow neck like a snowman. 2 objects that had drifted together and touched at walking pace and simply stayed. It is very probably the most pristine thing anyone has ever photographed, unchanged since the solar system was assembling itself, and it shows us how the building of worlds actually began. Not with violence, with 2 soft cold things bumping into each other and staying joined. Sleepy fact number 94. A comet's tail does not stream out behind it as it travels. It always points away from the sun, whichever way the comet happens to be going, so that on the way back out the comet is flying tail first, chasing its own tail into the dark. That is because the tail is not left behind by motion at all. It is blown off by the sun, partly by the solar wind and partly by the pressure of sunlight itself. From a nucleus that is often only a few miles across and is one of the blackest things in the solar system, darker than charcoal, a crust of dust and organic tar over ice. Most comets have two tails rather than one, a curved yellowish one of dust that lags behind along the orbit, and a straight blue one of ionized gas pointing directly away from the sun. And when a spacecraft went and landed on one, a decade ago, it found the surface strewn with boulders and dunes and cliffs, and it smelt, according to the instruments, of rotten eggs and horse stables and bitter almonds. The most beautiful objects in the sky are ugly close-up, which is a lesson that applies more widely. Sleepy fact number 95. And around all of this, enclosing the whole solar system like a shell, there is thought to be a vast spherical cloud of comets. It is called the Oort cloud, and no one has ever seen it, and it is inferred from where the long-period comets come from, because they arrive from all directions rather than from the flat plane of the planets, which means their reservoir must be a sphere rather than a disk. The estimates of its size are hard to hold in the head. Its inner edge may lie 2,000 times further from the sun than the Earth is, and its outer reaches may extend a quarter or a third of the way to the nearest star. It may contain 1,000 million comets, or many more, each one drifting in the deep cold at a walking pace, taking millions of years to complete a single orbit, so far apart from one another that they are effectively alone. That is the true boundary of the Sun's family, and here is the number to sleep on. Our fastest machine, the one that left in 1977, will need about 300 years to reach the inner edge of it, and about 30,000 years to pass all the way through and come out the other side. Before we take the last few, let us sit still out here for a moment and do nothing but look back the way we came. From this distance the sun is a point, and every world we have visited tonight lies somewhere between us and it, strung out along a line, invisible. And there is a nice quiet way of measuring that line, which is to stop talking about miles altogether and to talk about how long the light takes. From the Sun to Mercury, the light takes about 3 minutes. To Venus, 6. To this planet, 8 minutes and 20 seconds. To Mars, somewhere between 4 and 22 minutes, depending on where the two of us happen to be in our circuits. Out to Jupiter, about 43 minutes, so that an instruction sent from a control room takes the better part of an hour to arrive, and its answer takes the better part of another. Out to Saturn, about 80 minutes. To Uranus, 2 hours and 40 minutes. To Neptune, 4 hours and 10 minutes, which is why the spacecraft that flew past it in 1989 could not be steered in any live sense at all, and everything it did had to be written down and sent ahead and trusted. And out to where the little machine is now, more than 22 hours. The whole of the solar system, from the fire in the middle to its furthest working child, is very nearly 1 day wide, measured in light. That is a good size to hold in the head. Not billions of anything. 1 day. And there is something else worth sitting with, which is how quickly the whole grand tour actually happened, and how slowly. Those two machines left in the summer of 1977. They reached Jupiter in 1979, which is to say that everything anybody knew about the largest planet in this system was rewritten in a matter of weeks, in the spring and summer of 1 year, by 2 flypasts. The rings of Jupiter were discovered then, because somebody thought to take a long exposure looking back at the planet from its dark side, and nobody had expected there to be any rings at all. The volcanoes of Io were discovered then, by a navigation engineer studying a routine starfield image, who noticed a strange bulge on the limb of the moon that turned out to be a plume 200 miles high. Then Saturn, in 1980 and 1981, and the rings turned out to be not a handful of broad bands, but thousands upon thousands of fine ringlets, braided and kinked and shepherded by tiny moons, so intricate that the pictures caused a small crisis, because nobody's theory could account for that much structure. Then one of them was aimed at Titan, to look closely at that strange orange world, and doing so threw it up and out of the plane of the planets forever and ended its tour. That was a deliberate choice, made by people in a room who decided that one close look at Titan was worth giving up Uranus and Neptune. And the other one carried on alone into the outer dark for another 5 years, to Uranus in 1986, and then another 3 years to Neptune in 1989, arriving 12 years after leaving Florida, with its instruments cold and its light levels 1,000th of what they had been at Jupiter, taking photographs in near darkness with exposures long enough that the camera platform had to be turned slowly to follow the scene as the spacecraft rushed by. Those photographs of Neptune, blue and calm with its white streaks of cloud, came home in August of 1989. And that was the end of the planets. Every world in this solar system that has ever been seen close up by anybody had, by that August, been seen. The tour was over. Everyone who had worked on it went home or moved to other missions or retired, and the 2 machines, having done everything they were built to do, simply carried on, because there was nothing to stop them and no reason to switch them off. What they have done since, all the decades of quiet drifting, the crossing of the boundary, the sound of the interstellar hum, was never in the plan at all. It is what they did with the rest of their lives after the job was finished. Sleepy fact number 96. Things come in from outside. In the autumn of 2017, a telescope in Hawaii picked up a faint, fast-moving object that was behaving all wrong. It was travelling far too quickly to be bound to the sun, and its path was not an ellipse but an open curve, which meant it had come in from somewhere else entirely, passed by, and was already leaving, and would never return. It was the first object from another star system ever observed passing through ours. It was small, perhaps a few 100 yards long, oddly elongated, tumbling and reddish, and it was gone before anyone could get a proper look, and there is still no settled agreement about what it was. 2 years later a second one arrived, this time unmistakably a comet, complete with a tail, and this one we caught early enough to study properly, and its chemistry was recognizable and strange at once. There must be enormous numbers of these wanderers drifting between the stars, ejected long ago from the building of other planetary systems. Every so often, one of them passes through our house, crosses the hallway, and lets itself out. Sleepy fact number 97. In August of 2012, 35 years after leaving Florida, the little machine we began with crossed a boundary. The solar wind, that thin hot breath streaming out of the sun in every direction, had been getting weaker and slower around it for years, and then, over the course of a few days, the number of particles coming from the sun collapsed almost to nothing, while the number of cosmic rays arriving from the galaxy at large jumped sharply upward. It had reached the edge of the sun's bubble, about 11,000 million miles out. It had left the solar system, in the sense that matters most, and had passed into the material that lies between the stars. It took the better part of a year for the team to be confident enough to announce it, because the instrument that would have measured the surrounding plasma directly had failed decades earlier, and the case had to be built from other evidence. Its sibling followed 6 years later, in November of 2018, through a different part of that boundary, with its plasma instrument still working, and confirmed everything. They are the only 2 things our species has ever made that are outside. Sleepy fact number 98. And out there they heard something. Interstellar space is not silent in the way people imagine, because although there is no air to carry sound, the thin gas between the stars is a plasma, and plasma rings. When a gust of material from a solar outburst catches up with the machine and washes over it, the surrounding gas oscillates, and the plasma wave instrument aboard can measure the frequency of that oscillation and read from it exactly how dense the gas is. Those measurements have been turned into sound, shifted into the range our ears can use, and what you hear is a faint rising whistle, a thin tone with something almost mournful in it. More recently, the same instrument has picked up something else. A steady, narrow, persistent hum, always present, coming from the interstellar gas itself, quite apart from any outburst from the sun. It is the sound of the galaxy's own background, the constant faint ringing of the medium between the stars, and it has been playing all along, and nothing had ever been far enough out to hear it. Sleepy fact number 99. They are going somewhere, though not in any way that a navigator would recognize. Neither of them was aimed at a star, because the missions were about the planets, and everything since has been coasting. But if you take their present headings and run them forward, they do eventually pass near things. In about 40,000 years, the first of them will drift within 1.5 light years or so of a faint dim star in the constellation of the Giraffe, closer to it than we are to our own nearest neighbour star. Its sibling, going the other way, will pass within a similar distance of another quiet little star at about the same time. Neither will stop, neither will be captured. They will simply pass in the outer dark, unnoticed and unnoticing, at a distance so great that the star will be nothing but the brightest point in their sky, and carry on. 40,000 years is roughly the same span that separates us from the people who painted the walls of the caves at Chauvet. Sleepy fact number 100, and this is the last of them, and the one I would like to leave you with. Out there, nothing wears anything away. There is no air, no water, no weather, no bacteria, no rust, no hands to move things. There is only the very occasional strike from a grain of dust and the slow patient work of cosmic rays, which means those two machines are, almost certainly, going to outlast everything else we have ever made. The pyramids will be sand, the continents will have rearranged themselves, the oceans will have boiled away when the sun brightens, and the mountains will have gone, and the whole surface of this planet will have been erased and rewritten many times over, and eventually the earth itself will be swallowed or scorched to a cinder. And two small machines from the 1970s, with their gold records still bolted to their sides, will still be drifting, intact, cold, silent, carrying the sound of surf and a greeting in 55 languages and the picture of a mother feeding her child, going round the centre of this galaxy once every 230 million years, for thousands of millions of years, long after there is anybody left who could explain what they are. That is the 100th fact. The most permanent thing our species has ever done is a small act of hope that we posted into the dark before most people listening tonight were born. So there they are. 100 small, quiet facts, gathered up and set down again, and you are under no obligation whatsoever to have kept a single one of them. But we are not finished for the night, because there is no reason to stop just because the counting has, and because the best part of any long walk is the sitting down afterwards. So let us go back to the beginning, to the little machine still flying, and let us take our time about it, and let us look properly at that gold record bolted to its side, since we passed it rather quickly the first time. It is a phonograph record, which even in 1977 was becoming an old-fashioned way to store anything. They chose it precisely because it was old-fashioned, because a groove cut into metal is a physical shape that anybody with eyes or fingers and a little patience could work out how to read, whereas anything cleverer would depend on a machine to decode it, and machines rot. It is copper, plated with gold to resist erosion, and it comes in an aluminium cover with a diagram etched onto it explaining, in pictures only, how fast to turn it and how to lift the pictures out of it. And in one corner of that cover there is a small patch of uranium, put there for a single reason. Uranium decays at a known rate, so whoever finds it can measure how much has turned into lead and calculate, quite precisely, how long the thing has been travelling. It is a clock, included so that a stranger will know how old the letter is. Consider what is on it. There are 115 images encoded as signals in the grooves, and they were argued over for months by a small committee working to an absurd deadline. a photograph of the Earth from space, a diagram of continental drift, a page of a book, a woman in a supermarket buying grapes, a man eating, a man drinking, a man licking, a house, a road, a bridge, a violin with sheet music, a sunset, a mother nursing an infant, children being taught in a classroom, an old man with a dog and a bed of flowers. And then, on the audio side, there are the sounds of the earth chosen with the same seriousness. Thunder, rain, surf on a shore, wind in trees, a cricket, a frog, bird song, a chimpanzee, a horse and cart, a tractor, a ship's horn, a train whistle, a kiss. A mother speaking softly to her child. The footsteps and heartbeat and brainwaves of one particular young woman who lay in a laboratory with electrodes on her head while she thought deliberately about the history of civilization and about being in love, and whose recorded thoughts are now 11,000 million miles away and rising. And there is 90 minutes of music, which is the part people argue about most, because 90 minutes is nothing at all in which to represent everything anyone has ever played. There is Bach, 3 separate times, because the committee could not help themselves. There is Beethoven and Mozart and Stravinsky. There is a Navajo night chant and Japanese shakuhachi and a Peruvian wedding song and Solomon Islands panpipes and Azerbaijani bagpipes and a girl's initiation song from the Congo and a Bulgarian shepherdess singing alone. There is a blues recorded in a single afternoon in 1927 by a man who died in poverty and obscurity and who is now, by a comfortable margin, the most travelled musician in the history of the world. There is a rock and roll record from 1958 about a country boy who could play a guitar just like ringing a bell. And there are greetings in 55 languages, from ancient Sumerian to modern Chinese, most of them recorded in a single afternoon by whoever happened to be available around a university campus, saying, in their own tongues, "Hello, peace, we are friends, may all be well," and, in one case, from a small child, simply, "Hello from the children of planet Earth." The people who assembled it knew perfectly well what the odds were. The chance of that record ever being found by anybody is so small that it cannot honestly be distinguished from zero. The distances are too great, the target is too small, the time is too long. They said so themselves, at the time, quite plainly. And they did it anyway, and they did it carefully, arguing about every inclusion as though it truly mattered, because the act of choosing was the point. Somebody had to decide what a species would say about itself if it were only allowed to say one thing, once to nobody in particular. And what they decided to send was not our knowledge, and not our achievements, and not our history. It was rain, and surf, and a heartbeat, and a mother's voice, and a great deal of music, and a photograph of an old man with a dog and some flowers. Now let us find out where that little machine actually is, tonight. While you lie there, it is out beyond the Kuiper belt, beyond the last of the icy rubble, in a region where the sun is a point of light bright enough to hurt, if you looked at it directly, and dim enough that it would light nothing. It is well past the edge of the sun's bubble, in the interstellar medium proper, in gas that belongs to the galaxy and not to us. It is upright and pointed at us, because everything it has left is devoted to keeping the dish aimed at the small pale dot it came from. It is very cold, though it warms itself faintly with what remains of its plutonium. Most of its instruments are dark now. Its cameras have been off for more than 30 years and will never come on again. Its heaters have been shut down one after another, and each time the engineers have held their breath to see whether the thing would keep working at temperatures below what any of its parts were ever tested for. And each time it has. And it is still transmitting. Right now, as you lie there breathing slowly, there is a whisper of radio energy on its way here from that machine. And it will arrive in about 23 hours, and somebody's dish will catch it, and it will say almost nothing at all, and it will be the furthest thing any human being has ever heard from. Let us stay with that for a while, because there is a long, slow future attached to it, and long, slow futures are good company at this hour. Nothing that follows needs deciding by anybody, and none of it will happen for a very long time, and there is a great deal of comfort in a story where the ending is scheduled for 5,000 million years from now. Think of it as a timetable pinned up in an empty station. The sun goes on brightening, very slowly, as it has been doing for its whole life. Because as the hydrogen in its core turns to helium, the core grows denser and hotter and burns a little harder. In perhaps 1,000 million years, that gradual brightening will have pushed this planet past the point where the oceans can hold themselves together. The water will evaporate faster than the rain can bring it back, the vapor will thicken the sky will hold in more heat, and the whole arrangement will run away from us the way it ran away from Venus long ago. The oceans will go up into the air and then, over a very long time, be lost. The rivers we grew up beside, the sea you can smell from a coastal road with the window down, the rain that wakes you at 4 in the morning and puts you back to sleep, all of it lifted away, and the planet will still be here, turning dry, bright, quiet. Then the sun will finish the hydrogen in its core, and it will swell. Over a few 100 million years it will become a red giant, hundreds of times wider than it is now, cooler at the surface, but pouring out thousands of times more light. Mercury will be swallowed first, the little iron world with ice in its polar craters, and the ice will not last a morning. Then Venus, with its clouds of acid and its rain that never lands. The Earth may or may not be swallowed, and the calculations sit uncomfortably near the line, because as the sun sheds mass its grip loosens and the orbits all drift outward, so that the Earth may just outrun the fire and be left as a scorched airless ball orbiting a monstrous red sun that fills half its sky. And out in the cold, all the frozen things will finally get their turn. The great red sun will pour warmth out past Mars and past the asteroids, and the ice moons will begin to steam. Europa's shell will thin and crack, and its hidden ocean will meet the sky for the first time in 4,000 million years. Enceladus will boil away entirely. Titan, which is far too cold today for water and rains methane instead, will warm to the point where its water-ice bedrock softens, and there could be true lakes and true rain of the ordinary kind under an orange sky for a few 100 million years. If anything is ever going to happen out there, that is when it will happen, in the long warm afternoon at the end of the solar system, when the outer worlds thaw and the inner worlds are ash. Then the sun will let go. It will push its outer layers off in slow pulses, shell after shell, and those shells will drift outward and glow in the ultraviolet light of the exposed core, and for a few tens of thousands of years this system will be one of those beautiful ringed and lobed clouds that we photograph in other parts of the galaxy and print on calendars. Anyone looking from 1,000 light years away would see a small, elegant smoke ring where the sun used to be, and then the gas will thin and disperse and go back into the galaxy, to be gathered up eventually into some other star and some other set of planets, carrying atoms that were once in this ridge, this sage, this blanket, and in you, and what is left in the middle will be a white dwarf, an ember about the size of the Earth but holding half the mass of the sun, so dense that a teaspoon of it would weigh as much as a lorry. It will shine at first fiercely white, and it will have nothing left to burn, and it will simply cool. It will cool for thousands of millions of years. It will go from white to yellow to orange to red to a dull cinder, and the surviving outer planets will go on circling it in the dark, Jupiter and Saturn and the ice giants and whatever is left of the belts, in orbits grown wide and slow, lit by an ember. It will take longer than the universe has so far existed for that ember to cool to blackness, and nobody is certain the universe is old enough yet for a single one to have finished doing so anywhere. And through all of that, the two machines will still be flying. They will not be affected by any of it. By the time the sun swells, they will be so far away that its swelling will be a change in the brightness of one star among many, of no consequence at all. They will have long since stopped talking, of course. Sometime in the next few years, or the next decade if the engineering holds and the luck holds, the last instrument will be switched off to save power, and then the final trickle of electricity will fall below what the transmitter needs, and the whisper will stop. There will be a last signal, Somebody will be on shift when it comes, and probably will not know it is the last one until the next one fails to arrive. And after that the machines simply go on, deaf and mute and blind, at 38,000 miles an hour, exactly as they are, exactly as they were built. With the gold record and the diagram and the little patch of uranium quietly counting off the years. They will not fall into anything, they will not run out of anything, because they are not using anything. They will circle the centre of the galaxy along with everything else, going round once every 230 million years, drifting up above the disk and back down through it, passing stars at distances too great to matter. For as long as there is a galaxy, there is a calculation, and I have always liked it, that a gold record in interstellar space, struck only occasionally by dust and slowly scoured by cosmic rays, would still be playable after 1,000 million years. 1,000 million years is more than twice as long as there have been animals on this planet. Long after our species has become whatever it becomes, or has ended, and long after the surface of this world has been rewritten and rewritten again, and long after there is anyone left who knows what a phonograph was, there will be, somewhere out beyond the far side of this galaxy, a small dish antenna pointed at a star it can no longer find, carrying a recording of a Bulgarian shepherdess singing, and the sound of rain, and a woman's heartbeat, and a child saying hello. That is all still true tonight. It is true right now, while the room is dark, and while your breathing has slowed, and while the wind moves over the ridge where the old man is sleeping under his blanket, with the whole sky turning above him. And there is one more part of this that I have not told you, and it is the warmest part, so let us take it slowly. That whisper coming in from the outer dark has to be caught by somebody, and it is caught by 3 enormous dish antennas placed roughly a third of the way around the world from one another. One in the high desert of California, one in the hills outside Madrid, one in a valley in eastern Australia, so that as the Earth turns, one of them is always facing the right way. The largest of them are 230 feet across, standing in scrubland and sheep country, turning slowly on their mountings through the night. And time on those dishes is precious and fought over, because everything we have flying anywhere in the solar system wants to talk. And yet the schedule still finds hours for 2 machines from 1977 that can no longer take a photograph and can barely say anything at all. Somebody, tonight, is sitting in a quiet room watching a signal that left before they were born. The people who built those machines were mostly in their 20s and 30s when they did it. They drew the circuits by hand. They wrote the software in languages nobody teaches anymore, in a total memory smaller than a single photograph on the phone that is charging beside your bed, and they wrote it so carefully that it has run for half a century without being replaced. And when something goes wrong now, which it does, the team must go down into filing cabinets and shipping crates of paper documentation, and read the notes of engineers who are long since dead, and work out what a switch does that nobody alive has ever operated. A few years ago, the machine began sending home nonsense, page after page of meaningless data, and it took months of that kind of archaeology to trace the fault to a single failing chip, and to rewrite the affected code and tuck it into a different part of the memory, and to send that patch out across 15,000 million miles and wait 45 hours to find out whether it had worked. It worked. There was a small celebration in a room in California, and the oldest people in that room had been in the same building when the thing was launched. There is a lovely detail in that. The mission has now outlasted the working lives of most of the people who created it. There are engineers on the team today who were not born when the golden record was pressed, who have spent their whole careers keeping alive a machine designed by their parents' generation, and who will hand it on again to somebody else before it finally falls silent. Very few human projects are like that. Cathedrals, perhaps, long forests. It has become a relay rather than a task, and everybody who has ever touched it has known from the beginning that they were working on something whose ending they would not see. And the thing they are keeping alive out there is not doing anything spectacular. It is measuring the density of the gas between the stars. It is counting cosmic rays. It is reporting, in the plainest way possible, what it is like out there, in a place no other object made by anyone has ever been. And every single day that it keeps going, the map of the surveyed universe, the part we have actually put an instrument into rather than merely looked at from home, gets a little bit longer. 1,000,000 miles longer every day and a half or so. That is the whole of the work now. Just going and saying what it is like. Now let us come home, slowly, the way you would walk back along a lane you had already walked out along, noticing the same gates and the same trees from the other side. There is no new information in what follows. Everything after this point tonight is something you have already heard, said again more softly, and you may let it go past you in whatever order it likes. We turn around out there in the interstellar gas, with the hum of the galaxy in it, and we start back toward the small bright point of light that everything here belongs to. First we come back through the great spherical shell of comets, though we will not see any of them, because they are so far apart from one another that you could spend a lifetime in the middle of that cloud and never come within 1,000,000 miles of a single one. They drift there in the deep cold, thousands of millions of them, each one a few miles of dust and dirty ice. Each one taking longer to go round the sun than our species has existed. Every so often one of them is nudged, by the pull of a passing star or by the slow tug of the galaxy itself, and begins the long fall inward, and in 10,000 or 100,000 years it comes into the light, and grows 2 tails and passes across somebody's sky, and is written down and named and remembered. Then we come to the flat belt of icy bodies out beyond Neptune, where the little snowman lies with its 2 lobes gently joined, unchanged since the beginning, and where Pluto turns its great pale nitrogen heart toward the sun, with its glaciers flowing at the speed of continents, and its blue haze layered in the sky, and Charon hanging enormous and motionless over one hemisphere forever. Then Neptune, blue and quick-winded, with its dark storms coming and going every few years, and its diamonds sinking slowly through the hot dark, and Triton going round it backwards with nitrogen geysers on its pink south pole. Then Uranus, tipped over on its side, rolling around the sun with its 42 years of daylight, and its 42 years of night, its narrow black rings that were found by a blink of starlight from an aeroplane, its little moon with the tallest cliff in the solar system, the one you could fall from for 12 minutes. Then Saturn, and I hope you have kept something back for Saturn, because we may only be here for 100 million years of its company. The ring's 175,000 miles across and 30 feet thick, and made of countless separate pieces of clean ice, each on its own path, drifting past one another at walking pace. The hexagon standing at the North Pole in the clouds, the same shape it held when the Voyagers went past, and the same shape it held 30 years later. Titan, with its thick orange air and its rain of methane falling in slow fat drops, and its seas at the pole, where a person could put wings on their arms and fly. Enceladus, small and brilliant, throwing its ocean out through 4 cracks in its south pole so that anything passing can taste it without landing. Then Jupiter, and the great striped bulk of it, and the storm wider than the Earth that people have been drawing for 3.5 centuries. The ocean of liquid metal hydrogen thousands of miles deep, churning in the dark, generating the enormous field whose bubble would look wider than the moon in our sky if we could see it. Io, being kneaded and cooked and repaved by its own volcanoes. Europa, smooth and cracked, with more water underneath it than all our oceans, waiting patiently under the ice for somebody to come and look. Ganymede, larger than a planet, with its own small magnetic field and its own auroras. Callisto, quiet and pitted and old, sitting outside the worst of the radiation like a doorstep, and the 4 of them still visible tonight as a line of sparks beside a bright, unflickering lamp, exactly as they were to the man in Padua in the winter of 1609. Then the long, empty hall of the asteroid belt, where you could stand on one rock and see no other, and where 1/3 of everything is one round dwarf world with salt flats left by a buried sea. Then Mars, cold and rust-coloured, with its mountain the size of a country that you could walk up without noticing, and its canyon that would reach across a continent, and its blue sunsets, and its 2 little potato moons going opposite ways, and its glaciers of buried ice waiting under the dust, and its silent rover parked on a slope with the dust settling on its panels. Then our own moon, drifting 1.5 inches further away every year, ringing like a bell when something strikes it, holding our axis steady so the seasons come round in order, keeping one face turned to us forever, with boot prints on it that will outlast every city on Earth. Then Venus, brilliant and terrible, the evening star and the morning star that people took for 2 different things, with its 92 atmospheres of pressure, and its permanent 465-degree afternoon, and its acid rain that has never once reached the ground. And 30 miles above all of it, a thin band of sky, where the air is the temperature of a warm room. Then Mercury, small and battered and mostly iron, wrinkling as it cools, with a day 2 years long and a sunrise that sometimes changes its mind, and ice in craters where the sunlight has never fallen, and then the sun, which is nearly all of it, turning 600 million tons of hydrogen into helium every second, and losing 4 million tons of itself as light, so that some of that light can cross 93 million miles of nothing in 8 minutes and 20 seconds, and land, this coming morning, on a window frame, on a kettle, on the side of somebody's face, and then the ridge and the sage and the cold air and the warm ground, and the old man asleep against his boulder with the blanket half off, and the whole sky wheeling slowly over him, and every one of those worlds up there somewhere in it, doing exactly what we have said. At this very moment, without any assistance from anybody, there are 1 or 2 small things left over that did not fit anywhere in the counting, and I will set them down here quietly, and then we will let the night have the rest of itself. The first is about scale, because nothing anybody says about distances in space ever really lands, and there is only one trick that works. If you shrink the sun down to the size of a large grapefruit and set it on the ground at one end of a long park, then the Earth is a grain of sand about 10 paces away, and you could lose it in the grass and never find it again. Jupiter is a small pea about 50 paces off. Saturn is a slightly smaller pea 100 paces further. Neptune, at that scale, is nearly half a mile from the grapefruit, and it is a peppercorn. And the nearest other star, the next grapefruit, would be about 4,000 miles away, on another continent. That is the actual shape of things. A handful of specks around one warm ball, and then an emptiness so large that our best machine, going 38,000 miles an hour without stopping, would need something like 70,000 years to reach the next warm ball, if it were even pointed at one, which it is not. The second is about what you are made of. Every atom of hydrogen in the water in your body was made in the first few minutes after the beginning of everything, before there were any stars at all. Every atom of oxygen in that water, and every atom of carbon in your hands, and every atom of nitrogen in the air you have been breathing all evening, was made inside a star that lived and died before the sun was born, and was blown out into the dark and drifted for an age, and was gathered into the cloud that collapsed to make this solar system. The iron in your blood was forged in something violent. The calcium in your bones was made in a furnace. Every single heavy atom in the room you are lying in has been through the inside of a star. That is not a metaphor, and it is not poetry. It is simply the supply chain, and it is worth knowing that the ordinary business of a body, breathing, warming a bed, is being carried out entirely with borrowed material that will go back eventually, and that has been round several times already. The third is a small piece of arithmetic that I like to end on. We have been talking for something over 3 hours now. In that time, while you have been lying still and letting your breathing slow and possibly drifting off some while ago and hearing none of this, the little machine we began with has travelled about 120,000 miles further away from us. It went that far while we talked about volcanoes on a moon and the wind on Neptune and the hexagon on Saturn. It is that much further out now than it was when you settled down. and it will be further still by morning, and further still by the time you next think about it, which may be never, and that is perfectly all right, because it does not require anybody's attention to continue. It has never once required anybody's attention. That is rather the comfort of the whole thing. The solar system does not need to be watched. The sun will convert its 600 million tons of hydrogen this second and the next second, and the second after that, whether or not anyone is awake. Jupiter's storm will turn. Io will erupt. The ice will hold on the floors of the polar craters on Mercury, a few miles from ground hot enough to melt lead. Titan will have its slow methane rain. Europa's ocean will go on moving under the ice in the dark, as it has done for 4,000 million years, entirely uninterested in whether anybody ever finds out what is in it. And in the morning, 8 minutes and 20 seconds after it leaves, the light will arrive here again, as it has every morning for 4,500 million years, without one single failure. And it will find the window, and the kettle, and the side of somebody's face. So let it all go now. Let the facts go first, since they were never yours to keep. Let the numbers go, all the billions and the thousands of millions, which were only ever a way of saying that things are large and old and patient. Let the worlds go, one at a time, out and out, Mercury and Venus and Mars, the belt, the giants, the ice, the cold rubble, the shell of comets, the dark. Let the ridge go, and the sage and the old man asleep under his blanket with his chin down on his chest. Let the room go. Let the day you had go, whatever it held, whatever it took out of you. And let tomorrow stay where it is, on the far side of a night that has not finished yet, and is in no hurry to. There is nothing left that needs deciding. There is nothing left that needs carrying. The sky is turning over, very slowly, the way it always has. The small machine is still flying. And you are exactly where you need to be, which is here, warm, still, and going nowhere at all. Sleep well.